And we're good.
We're good?
Yep.
Okay. Right, so we will call, well, are you two ready? Before I call it to order, are you ready? Okay, so we'll call the meeting to order. So, just for starters, for those of you watching from home, we are starting with a new program tonight called Board Book, which if you go onto our website and go to the school board agenda, there is a link for that. And so if you're looking at Board Book right now and if you've signed in, you can actually, as Becky's going to show us, there's an option up there that says projector. And if you click that, you'll be able to follow along with me as I change the agenda items on my screen. It will change on your screen. So, just so you can kind of get a feeling for that. Okay. This looks so different, so everyone please just bear with us as we learn how to do all of this. So, can we do roll call?
Becky Beisel.
Here.
Brian Davis.
Here.
Dave Kendall.
Here.
Kelsey Waits.
Here.
Lisa Hedin.
Here.
Scott Gergen.
Here.
Stephanie Malm. Here.
All right, and do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes, so a couple of things. One, on the regular board meeting agenda, because right here it looks like they're linked into two items together, so the regular one. We talk about the social media policy. Was there any action or recommendation on that, or it's just we just talked about it? And then, so that's on the regular one. And then, I don't know if this is related. This is related in that we had that MSBA meeting on the 30th of January. Is there minutes on that? Is there committee? Well, I'm talking about two things. I'm talking about is there a committee report or minutes or something that's going to come on that 30th of January meeting? Just a curiosity question. What's that in here? Yeah, in the regular board minutes. Let's see. I didn't know. I feel like I should be able to put a sticky note in here because it says sticky note at the top of the page, but I don't follow up with that at home. In the upper middle half of page 2, it says Interim Superintendent Peshta briefly discussed his recommendation that the board's policy committee should consider discussing, researching, and implementing a social media policy, helping the district to determine how to handle district social media communication. I could not remember if there was an act. This is on the regular one. This is on the 22nd.
No, I don't believe that was
Did
an
anything
action item.
that was just a thing,
Right.
and
Yeah.
we didn't do anything with
No.
that? Okay, we've got 2 chairs over here. Okay. All right, that was my question on that. And then, are there minutes from the 30th meeting where we had MSBA come in and we talked about things? Oh yeah, I had minutes, reference. I don't believe we've seen them yet, and I don't know if that's gonna come in as
I haven't
minutes
seen any
or
yet. And I'm not sure
or a
if,
committee report.
how we want to, how that will be handled from here on out. If those will need to have minutes, we've talked about whether Becky will be at all of those meetings, whether we'll do minutes, how that will.
Yeah, that's why I
work,
didn't
we
know
need
if it
minutes.
was what it was gonna be.
Right. Do you have any?
There's special meetings, you probably want to keep minutes. But you could say the first one was more of a, your minutes are, we've got organized, we got our dates together or whatever, because.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not what this one was, I don't think, was it?
For the meeting on the
On
30th?
the 30th. Is that when we set the calendar, or is that when we talked about the final brochure? I didn't finalize the brochure on the 30th.
Yeah, I think that was the finalizing the brochure and double checking the calendar.
Yeah. So those are my 2 points of discussion on the table file and the approval of the agenda. Or minutes or whatever it is we're approving.
Well, so I think we've answered your question about the social media policy and that is adequately represented in the minutes.
It was just a
or
discussion.
accurately represented.
Okay.
And then we don't have any minutes to approve for the 30th meeting now, and we'll go back and see if we have minutes, and if so, we can approve them at a future board meeting.
Okay.
And figure that out from there.
Okay. And then is any action we take on this approval of the agenda, or is this approval of minutes? are we doing them all together?
All together.
It's all again.
All together.
And if we have something on consent agenda, we can pull it out later, or do we have to talk about it now?
We can pull it out at any time. Right, yep. We can pull
Okay,
it
so
out
when
at
we
any
get closer to
When we do
consent agenda,
consent
there might be a
Yeah.
couple items we can pull out,
Question,
Mhm.
cool. Yep.
and then put them right after for action. Okay, apparently I had 3 questions on that.
That's okay. We're all kind of trying to figure out this new system, both with board book and then kind of with the different agenda order here.
Yeah, we
so-
just got a lot of
Yeah.
actions going on, and I wanna make sure that we have a fair
Absolutely.
cumulative representation of our
Mhm.
activity.
So is there any more discussion? Oh, Scott?
Under items for discussion, I would propose that we add an item F, which would be COVID-19 preparation for the district.
It might be up to item G.
Yep, it looks like that'll be item G.
Okay.
Let's see.
Alright. So is that a motion to add that? No.
So moved, yes.
Alright. And is there a second to add that to discussion?
Second.
Okay. So at this point, if there's a motion to approve the agenda and table file with the amendment attached.
Yeah, approve the amendment first, wonderful notes.
Alright, is there any discussion on the amendment? Okay, all those
I
in
think we
favor?
could talk, yeah, we can talk about it, I don't know who knows. It's good to
Yeah.
bring up. Are we gonna do just that one?
Let's just approve the amendment that you guys
And then we could
put,
do another amendment?
and then we can approve moving forward, but you have a motion on the floor, it's seconded.
Yep.
There's been discussion, or there could be
Yep.
discussion, so then it's just call the motion
Yep.
for the amendment.
Okay.
So is there any more discussion about the amendment? Alright, all those in favor of the amendment to add discussion of COVID, the coronavirus to the agenda item, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Alright, motion carries. Alright, Lisa, did you
I-
mention another amendment?
Yeah, I'd like us to have a, regular either administrative report, probably an administrative report on the, bond expenditures, bids out, modifications, and what we have on here right now is just to, change orders. We still don't have a cumulative report.
It's in the
It-
finance report.
It's in the finance
Mhm.
report?
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
And when we get to it, we can talk about if that's the place that you'd like it to be.
Well, I'd like it to,
We
where I can find
we
it,
talked
but that's
about
okay.
filling it
Where's
out, but then
finance?
it becomes detached from the rest of the finance report, which you may or may not prefer.
Should stick with the financial report.
Okay, it's in bills payable. Yeah, no, that's fine. Maybe we should title that differently. Maybe just for me.
So is that clarified?
Uh, yeah, I'm just trying to find it in the real world here. It's not current.
When we go to the finance report, would be a good time to talk about that's where you want these items,
Oh,
I think, right?
Alright, did this change again? This doesn't
This
quite
is
match. Okay, but this didn't get updated. Exactly. This was pretty different. Jen, so I don't have to look at all of these pages, is it near the end?
It's 4. It's
Four?
page 4.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, I lost momentum. This actually was one of the ones I couldn't read it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So then we've approved the amendment to the agenda, so do we need to take another motion now to pass the agenda with the, we're good? Is there any more discussion regarding approval of the agenda or table file? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay, motion carries. So I would also like to recognize the visitors tonight. We do have quite a few people here watching in person and from home. And we have a number of students from River Falls as well sitting in on the meeting tonight to kind of just see how it's all going. So thank you for coming. Okay. announcements, and
Is the superintendent's memo just for information, or is it draft of the minutes? So we went right by it.
okay.
So, we'll switch into the announcements and recognitions and the good news items. And I was actually going to cover what Lisa just mentioned. One of the good news items is that we are ready to launch into the use of Board Book. When I recommended it, I had been using Board Book Classic for the past 5 years. And that's sunsetting, so they'll only sell Board Book Premier. And so this is my first exposure here in the last couple days to Board Book Premier. And it is a very powerful tool, but it's gonna be a big adjustment. It's very powerful. Becky's enjoying using it already, but it'll be an adjustment for everybody. So it's much more complicated than the version that I recommended, but ultimately I think will be very successful for you. One thing in the old version was you could toggle back and forth between the superintendent memo and look at recommendations and things like that. That we're gonna have to figure out how we could possibly do that on this version. We're not familiar with it enough yet, so we gave each director a paper copy of the superintendent memo, which mirrors the agenda. The key part of it is things like the recognitions and whatever are listed out there on the memo, but the key part is when you get to action items that there is actually recommendations for each item. And that's one of the roles of the superintendent is to make recommendations. You're under no obligation to follow any of the recommendations, but when the recommendation is there, it gets the ball rolling and gets you moving, and sometimes it gives you maybe the language you're looking for to make a motion or introduce a resolution, so it's helpful to have it there. In addition to being a conversation starter, I am giving actual recommendations, and sometimes I will preface it by saying, it's a soft recommendation. I think, if you're gonna go one way or another, I'd say go this way, and sometimes it'll be a little bit more firm recommendation that I've really spent a lot of time on this, and I think it's a very important issue. But either way, they're just your jumping off point as the board. So we'll get into the good news items, and the other good news is that there is an awful lot of them this time of year, so it'll be exciting to hear all this. Last week was the Minnesota School Board Recognition Week, so we give thanks to our new and ongoing board directors for their service to the school district. We'd like to take a photo at the end while we have everybody here. Even Director Pemble is here, so if we can get a picture of all of you together at the end, that'd be good, because we have multiple uses where we want a picture of the board and we don't have one of the newly seated boards, so we'll grab that. I'm trying to remember for that. We also want to mention Carrie Cotton, our high school nurse. She returned to her duties today after deployment to the Miramar Marine Corps Air Station in California. Carrie served as part of the National Disaster Medical System's efforts to quarantine citizens at risk for exposure to the COVID-19 or coronavirus. As a precautionary measure, the district placed Carrie on paid administrative leave to ensure a recommended monitoring period of 14 days between her last patient care and reporting to work at the high school. So thank you, Carrie, for your service, and also thank you to Barbara Anderson and Deanne Whitfield for helping to cover at the high school during Carrie's deployment. Bravo to the Hastings Middle School 8th grade women's choir and Hastings High School Select Chorale on their featured performances at the Minnesota Music Educators Association Midwinter Convention. I was able to get over to see that, and that was just a tremendous highlight to have that talent on display at the big event for music educators in our state. Congratulations to the boys swim medley relay of Joe Everson, Phil Jensen, Liam Schellhammer, and Avery Stoffel, and diver Ryan Lester on qualifying for the state swim and dive meet. Congratulations to the wrestling team on their qualifications to the state team tournament, and the individual qualifiers, Josh Root, Aiden Erickson, Garrett Bying, Nolan Myers, Cameron Olson, John Kendall, and Mukhtar Ali. And congrats to the boys alpine ski team on their 8th place state finish, and to individual alpine qualifiers Sam Molitor and Abby Palava. And kudos to the individual Nordic skiers Trevor Kaflish, Linnea Urban, and Emma Bratvold on their placement at the state meet. I apologize if I did not pronounce any names correctly, but that's my best attempt at them. And so a lot of amazing stuff going on in Hastings. In fact, it's hard to even get around to see some of it. So it's worthy of including that in our board record, those accomplishments.
I have something to add. Tim Hanneberg won the Section 3 AAA Coach of the Year, and Paul Veit won the Section 3 AAA Assistant Coach of the Year for the wrestling.
Okay, thank you. So we'll
Yeah,
we'll
and
add those to
there
the
was
record.
Alan Welch, is Metro East Conference coach for hockey. And our high school knowledge bowl, one of those teams went to semifinal in the state. I don't remember the names of everybody on it, so I'm not gonna list the two that I do remember.
All right, we'll get the details on that and add it to the record of
Yeah.
the board recognition.
That's a lot of exciting news. So thank you and congratulations to everyone participating, and that's wonderful. All right. So items for discussion. We were originally going to have a presentation by the middle school, and that has been postponed until hopefully next month, but that was originally on the agenda.
And so we have, Steve Kovacs asked if he could present at the upcoming work session. So it's gonna be a full session, but being we already have his presentation and the impact it would have on next year's calendar if you were to approve that 5th grade orientation day, I think it should go pretty quickly. And it's also an opportunity for him to come and represent the middle school and just give you an update on how the year's been going at the middle school and what are the things that are of note there. So if you're okay with it, we'll
Yeah.
have
I
him
think
come to
that's
March
fine.
11th. And then if you did decide to act on his request, you would act at the March 26th meeting. I believe it's 26th.
Next up is the Todd Field parcel proposal update.
All right, so last work session, we, based on some direction from the board to have contact with MnDOT officials and working with the engineer assigned to the Todd Field discussion over the years, going to pick up that trail as the interim superintendent. So I pulled together everything that I could find out from the original document. So there's a summary there that you're looking at right now, and everything from the original lease to the options that were being proposed, so we'd have them in one place. And since that time, the kind of the last thing on there was we've had some board directors making contact with area legislators to see if they could perhaps work on our behalf for a more favorable lease option. And I did speak with Molly Klein from MnDOT this week, and she informed me that we, as a district, were getting the government lease rate. There was some discussion that maybe we weren't getting a government rate, we were getting a commercial or other category lease rate. So once again, I'm not sure the decision-making level that Molly's at, but she's been great to work with and filled me in on the details, and she's indicated that they double-checked, we are indeed getting quoted the government lease rate. One change that did develop, though, is they relooked at the square footage of the parcel where the parking lot is, and she indicated that there's supposed to be a road right away through there, even though it's unlikely we're putting a road there anytime soon. So they could actually take that road right away out and reduce the square footage. So this morning, their real estate agent at MnDOT provided us with an updated lease quote, and that is the new attachment, and that was shared earlier today with the board. So I just wanted to, that is now something that literally happened today that we would tack on to that whole timeline of the lease. So at this point, we have that option to purchase under the concession stand. We have a lease option for the area under the parking lot. We can move on whatever timeline you want to continue to explore that. The question that I asked her today on behalf of the board was, if they do accept this lease, can the lease payments be applied towards purchasing the land underneath the parking lot? And her response was, not until they define the project, because the project is tentative. And so they can't sell land until they define the scope of their Highway 61 project. At any point when they can identify the end of the project, then they could renegotiate and perhaps make the lease payments towards purchase. But right now, the only option is just to lease. We asked about what if scenario if we don't make any payment, and we just ignored the parking lot. She said it's likely that MnDOT would require us to return the parking lot back to its natural state, which would mean remove the asphalt that's there. She also mentioned that the Highway 55 corridor includes the bleachers and the press box there. And she said that technically there are no permanent structures allowed along that corridor, but they weren't pushing that topic right now. So if, I guess if there's disagreement, that's something that they may choose to exercise and have the press box or the PA stand taken down. She said the bleachers weren't considered permanent, but I've heard that other conversations with them, they did identify them as permanent. So that's where we stand at it right now. I know she did indicate that she received communication indirectly through her office from the contact that our area legislators have made, and I saw some statements made by area legislators that they've been, active on the district's behalf to try to get the best deal for us. So that's where we sit right now. And if there are any other follow-up items that you would like me to work on, talk about that.
Did she give a timeline of when they would move towards identifying a permanent land requirement?
She couldn't give a timeline.
She couldn't give a
She says the scope of the project has not been defined.
Okay.
They're
Because
still
if it was
in
a
the
year.
2025 section
Yeah.
projection.
Well, that puts us in 5 years of lease
Right.
payments prior to. That's why I was asking. If they were 2 years out and we paid
No.
lease payments for a couple years and then they started being applied to a purchase price, I'd feel
Right.
probably feel
And
differently. Okay, so
I
we just
did-
gotta.
I did talk to
Consider.
Senator Bigham this afternoon, after you had sent this update to us, and she said she would continue working on our behalf to see if there's a way to come up with somehow putting this lease money towards the future purchase. I know there's not a date involved, but if there's any way that somehow this can,
It could be a retroactive
right,
application
if
or
somehow we
something.
can put this towards it once we go to purchase, that's what she's going to focus on trying to do. I sent a follow-up email to Representative Juergens as well, and so hopefully we hear back from him and can also have him working on our behalf on that, so.
I'd like to take a step back just to understand what triggered this. Was it our project that triggered it? Because the agreement that I'm looking at right now is a term of 50 years, commencing on June 1, 1990, ending on May 31, 2040, terminable by both the landlord and the tenant. So they terminated it. By this agreement, they need to give us 180 days of notice. I don't know if that has been done or not. But but for this project going on, would we still be paying the $1 lease? And
Right.
That's the frustrating part about all of this, is that it just feels like
Hasn't,
Right.
it feels like this is kind of a late breaking news, and it's a significant expense.
Yep, I feel like they should have notified us of this change before we made the changes to the parking lot, that they were aware we were making.
Right.
That this is something that should have been brought to our attention before we ever brought the asphalt in and did the changes. And I'm not sure where the communication got lost. I agree, I don't know what sparked this.
Yeah, it's really disappointing. You know, I mean, we are all working in the same public space, and it just feels like we have no choice here.
No.
In my view, it's
Yeah.
like, well,
Our hands are tied.
you either pay it, or they're gonna then take the next step, which is, okay, rip it out.
Yep.
Which would be absolutely
Right.
foolish, but to pay, for the next 5 years, to pay nearly $45,000 for a tiny little parking lot is,
Yeah,
I don't know.
I
just-
agree.
It doesn't sit well with me.
I wonder
At all.
if after the parcel was built and finished, and once the county came through and reevaluated the property, that opened up the door for the state to come back and reevaluate the land and the change in the property value.
Yeah.
Sure, but
if that's the,
like any other piece of property in the city of Hastings, it's evaluated on an annual basis. So presumably, this has been evaluated on an annual basis, just like my home, just like your home,
I think it was.
since 1990, and everything was just fine. And now all of a sudden,
Right.
we make an improvement to it,
Yeah,
and
the valuation of the land with the improvement raised the value.
Except we
I-
still had
no,
a
the valuation-
50-year
the-
lease.
The majority of the valuation is in the land. The
Right.
majority of the valuation is not
But
in
I
us
don't-
putting pavement on top of it.
I agree.
But
And we had a 50-year
moving forward, I
lease.
think you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, the school district entered into a 50-year agreement and paid up front for those 50 years. And part of that lease breaking, that's the question where, okay, we probably need some legal counsel to
Well,
figure out.
Well, it says right here that commencing on, blah, 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 with the right of termination in both landlord and tenant as hereinafter set forth. And the only thing it says is that if either party is going to exit the agreement, they need to give 180 days of notice. Now, I'm not splitting hairs here, because whether we pay the 44,000 and whatever dollars now, or we pay it in 180 days, I don't think we're gonna know anything more in 6 months than we know right now. So I kinda feel like they've got us over a barrel
Yeah.
here.
And I feel like they
But-
should have been required to give that 180 days before we made the renovations to the space, before we,
Uh,
otherwise, how can they
Yeah.
also require us to rip it up if we choose not to follow? I'm not a legal scholar, but I am incredibly frustrated. I feel like we should be working together to improve the lives of the students in Minnesota, right? We all have that job. The state should be looking out for the welfare of Minnesotans. The school district is looking out for the welfare of the students here, and we should all be on the same team. And to me, this does not feel like we are. But
I agree. So there, venting over.
I guess I'd like to move the point a little bit and say that, somewhere down the line in action, we can send this off to some legal counsel to give the board an opinion as to, how this has been transpired, what are our options, and where do we go from here?
Yeah. I think that's fine. I think whatever if we choose to do that, I think whatever findings we have need to be tempered with our ongoing working relationship with the state. Because the last thing I want to do is stir up the hornet's nest, and now all of a sudden, things that they're not taking issue with along Highway 55, all of a sudden, they're
Become
going to take
issues.
issue with.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, things that we've been working and playing nicely with them along Highway 61 with the collapsing wall and issues we've had there, now all of a sudden, the cooperation ends. So my gut tells me one thing and my brain is telling me another.
either way, they've got us in a position where
Yeah.
we can't really do anything.
Yeah, it's just disappointing because it's a lot of money
Mhm.
for a parking lot that is not very often used.
Okay. It was a good vent.
What's our
But
what's our
are we-
timeline
Are
on
we
this?
suggesting that we actually invest into a legal review of it, or do we want to just keep it as a discussion item and keep talking about it? Because, the
I
only
mean, I
the only
guess
thing
we
worse
could-
than spending the money, what we may have to, is to spend more money
Then what we need to.
you know, arguing about what, but if we believe there's something that needs to be researched, because everything that I have, literally everything, is in those documents that I
Right.
have available, but that's the whole story that I could pull out.
Well, my thought would be, since this is new information now with today's lease document, and we've just reached out to our representatives in St. Paul, that we wait to see what they hear, if they can get any more information before we jump to talking about legal counsel. That's what I would think.
That's fine with me.
And again, I'm not an attorney either, but the agreement that we have is it's pretty short and it's pretty straightforward.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know that we're going to get anywhere. I'm not saying move forward or don't. I guess if you were asking me to lean one way or another, I would say we don't really need an attorney to review this, because the end game is, well, what if the attorney comes back and says, well, you could argue this point or whatever. Again, that goes back to
Mhm.
the point of, do we want to be arguing with somebody that we need to cooperate with now
True.
and over the next 5 to 10 years as they start messing with Highway 55 and
Okay, I guess then my thought is that we just follow as the chair said and you know, let our representatives see what they can do with it. I mean, we can all be very frustrated, but I agree, and the bottom line is, you know, where do we go? We're probably just stuck. There's probably not a lot of options moving forward. It's just, to me, it's like, you know, reading through the 180 day need for announcement, that hasn't come about, you know, and it's like, okay, how is this their point by sending us a new lease? They started the time frame and they're saying, okay, you guys have to do something within 180 degrees of the first notice of discussion.
So, yeah, so one thing that I could do is I just received today notification from C, Schools for Equity and Education, which Hastings is a member of, that they've set appointments for Hastings to visit with various legislators in the area. Some of them don't represent us, but they're in the area. So there is an appointment with Senator Bigham and Representative Jurgens on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, and I plan to attend that. It is open to any other board member or community member that wants to go and advocate for the district. So if anybody, at a minimum, I can show them the new proposal that they made and show that they reduced the square footage, but they're still asking for 753 or whatever it is per month, and update them on that. That's
I've
one
gone
step
on
we
the
could do.
C lobbying days before, and I think they're valuable, but the time is taken up by sort of C issues.
Right,
You
no,
know,
I'll have to
like
kind of hit them up on the
lobbyists, you'll have to
side.
try and
with-
grab 'em on the
with
side,
just
which
our
may or may
two-
not work.
Our two.
I think just maybe
That's right.
staying in touch with them might advance it, and I agree, this is the frustrating part of the negotiations, and at the end of the day, if we can get, I believe, if we can get agreement that anything we pay will count towards purchase, whatever that
Yeah.
looks like on MnDOT's books.
That would be.
I
That
am
would be-
perfectly fine with
Whatever that
that.
looks
would be
like,
Yeah.
I
fantastic.
would accept that to just be done, you know,
And-
I would accept that price to be done.
And
And there too, we'd have to continue to be cooperative with them because they don't know their project and they don't know what they're gonna need. And, you know, we just have to build that trust relationship to a point where we say, we trust you're gonna credit our account and you trust that we're gonna work with you in good faith on
Right.
whatever reconstruction of this area looks like.
Right.
I'd rather see us move that direction
Yep.
through just ongoing conversations both with Molly and our legislatures and frequent updates to ourselves.
Hopefully that we can have that kind of process and work through whoever
Right.
the engineer is and whatever outcome when the design actually comes to fruition on what the Highway 61 project is gonna be.
Right, but I feel like we would enter that conversation with a high level of integrity and an intent to be solution oriented. I trust that about us, and I want to trust about them that there would be a credit for these payments. And if we can get to that point, if they can trust us on that point and we can trust them on that point, whatever some sort of agreement might look like, I'd feel
I'd
comfortable moving forward to
I'd like to
conclusion.
think hopefully that in the end, we do get to purchase the land instead of continuing to make some kind of lease
Yep.
for the property.
Yep, I agree.
Well, but again, who knows what the project is going to look like and
Well,
what they're going to
yeah,
need for a
that's right.
parking basin and everything else. I mean, this
Oh,
may
yeah.
turn into a moot point.
Yeah,
And I want to give credit to the folks we've been working with thus far because the amount was nearly $80,000 in these payments
It was
over
more than
5 years.
that.
It was
I think it was-
$79,800. So, thank you for getting it down to below 45,000. But let's keep working in the right direction, so.
Yep.
Do we have a timeline to make a decision?
Has Molly said anything to you about no? Okay. So we just keep discussing.
Keep it as an open item and
Yeah.
move
Yep.
forward.
All right. So next up
Well,
is,
Before, so that's, maybe I'm not understanding. Are we talking about just, there's two pieces here.
Yeah, where are we at with
There's
purchase
the
piece?
purchase of the little strip of land that
Mhm.
runs underneath the concession stand, and then so we've talked about the lease, which is kind of for simplicity, that's the parking lot area.
Mhm.
Then we have the little strip of land, which
That's right.
the concession stand sits half on, half off. Okay, this is nothing new. The old concession stand did that too. This, again, is not anything new. So in that diagram, it's the convey parcel 79, whatever that says, 79X.
Yep.
Okay, and according to what I read, and I want to make sure I have the right number here, that is up to us to purchase, if we so choose, for $137,000. So I think we kind of have two decisions. Maybe we move the same direction in both of them. I don't know. But we haven't really talked about that.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that piece at all.
No, we haven't, and that's based on, I mean, just the market value of that piece of land. So that one's not as controversial. I don't know if we want to wait until we approve both at one time, how we would want to move forward. Keep them as two separate items, keep them together.
Well, I view them as two separate items, but we can
Yeah.
certainly move them both
Monitor
in the
them
same
both going
direction or
forward.
separate or whatever we'd like to do.
Yeah.
I guess to me, it would make sense to sit tight on this until we hear what would happen with the other one. I don't think
Yeah.
we're under any pressure to act on this
Mhm.
in the very, very near term. But I don't see this, I think we probably need to make a decision in the next few months.
Yep.
I think you have until they tell you that you need to remove the asphalt, would be your final warning that you need to decide.
But I'd like them not to get it
I'd
that
like to
far.
not,
Yeah.
I'd
Again,
like to make a decision before it comes to
don't,
that.
don't poke the bear. Let's,
Yeah, I
But,
think
uh,
it's
just-
for that.
to recognize that there's two separate pieces here.
All right, so next up is the consideration of high school athletic fields parking lot options.
So this is a part of the facilities improvement bond that was scheduled out in the initial projects. I actually sat in on a meeting with Wold in December with Tim Collins and heard about this for the first time. Tim drove me out there and we accessed it from the township road, and he explained the purpose behind this additional parking, and that's important to connect back to the original or the intended purpose, because now what Wold has told us here recently is that the cost, when it was bid out, that was on that point in time, the cost of doing parking lots. Construction costs in certain areas and certain materials have increased considerably, and so they could no longer do the original design of the lot for the amount that was allocated in the construction budget. So instead, they've come up with three options that if we were to move on them here this summer, they are believing that you have three options and three price points. The original plan was a paved and guttered 129 parking stall lot. And the intention was that it's additional parking, it's convenience parking, in particular for those people with limited mobility that need to access the far side of the fields rather than parking at the main parking and walking across fields. My understanding is the district wanted some convenience parking, not to become the primary parking lot, not to replace the other parking. And so a 129 stall lot would be a very large lot. Right now you see the three options there are switching to gravel, which they said has been confirmed by an Integer Township that it's acceptable to do gravel there. They can do paved with 129 parking stalls, but then the price would go up about $150,000. Or they can reduce the number of parking stalls and get it back close to the original budget amount, so you'd have a smaller paved lot. So at this point, it's a discussion item. However, and I'll open it up for Jen Super to jump in if she needs to at all, because she was in on this meeting as well, and understands how things were budgeted for this. The next document that you have after these options is their bidding timeline. So literally, if they're going to do any one of these three options, they would need to bid it before you meet in your next regular meeting. So we've talked about discussion items and can they be moved to action items, and I think that warrants further discussion as we're just now working with a new meeting agenda order and new board book and a lot of moving parts. Unfortunately, this is one that's presented to us, like many of the things as interim superintendent, where as soon as I pick them up, I'm dealing with them, but I can't get any further out in front of it. So I can't buy you any more time other than to stall the parking lots to another season. But if you want to do them this year, you would have to pick one of these options this meeting. And so we did put it down as an action item with a recommendation. So we'd act, I wouldn't normally jump right down to an action item, but we have it there so that you can at least consider taking action on this. So we don't have to move it right now to an action item because it's already a placeholder there. And I wouldn't normally do that to you, like I said, but this is the timeline that we're up against. So we can have discussion on it, and then we'll come back to it as an action item, decide if you want to act or shelf it for a year. Because you don't have a parking lot there, so nothing
Okay,
would
so-
change.
To clarify, this was a meeting that you and Jen had with Walt, but facilities hasn't met on it.
No, it
So
just happened
Okay.
last
Did it happen
week.
in January when that
No, it
was
just
dated?
happened last week.
Well,
Because
we-
the letter's dated, well, now this letter's dated February, but.
We didn't
There's-
have the numbers. At the facilities committee, though, we did
Right. We
discuss
talked
the
about
different
it. Right,
parking lot
and then-
options.
Now they provide the quote.
Mhm.
And
Ninja
then
contacted
option
me
two-
and asked about where we were at with that process. And I said, you know, part of the bond was the agreement that there would be some kind of parking lot put in there for X amount of dollars. They were concerned moving forward as, okay, this is the township road, and where the obligation fell as far as what we wanted to put in that fit into their building code. And the initial discussion was that this was going to be, and Scott, you could probably correct me more on this, or Lisa, but originally when this discussion came around, when I was still on the facilities committee, we had talked about having at least just a gravel parking area there to alleviate some of that on 140th Street.
Well, yeah, the issue, it goes beyond it just being a convenience item. It's really a safety
It's a
issue.
safety.
Right, because we've had a
not-
number of issues there.
And not only for our kids, but for our community as a whole. I mean, I've been up there more times than I can count for Little Raiders football and and those types of activities where, number one, it's a gravel, that section of 140th or Featherstone Road, the extension of Featherstone Road, is a standard 2-lane gravel,
No
your
shoulders.
standard
Mhm.
country road.
Right.
Parking is only allowed on one side of the street. Routinely, people ignore that, especially
on
folks
both
that are
sides.
coming, in the case of Little Raiders, from out of town. They sometimes ignore that because the stretch of cars gets to be so long. So they park on both sides of the road. People, unfortunately, don't always drive with care on that road. I mean, I've been out there where cars have buzzed by as the little guys and girls are getting out of their vehicles, and it just is, it's set up for a tragedy.
Yep.
Now, the other issue that we had was that because there's parking on that road, there's no way to get to the fields without going through a fairly steep ditch and up an embankment. And I've seen any number of our elderly citizens trying to traverse that, and again, it's just set up for tragedy or a lawsuit.
Yep.
So, well, I have a question about I read in here that the gravel could be converted to paved going forward. So I have two questions about that. Number one, is because I'm remembering up at the high school when we had the repave project up there, and all of a sudden we got stuck with
Bad
a
substrate.
multiple tens of thousands of dollars because the substrate wasn't up to snuff. Well, are they going to are they gonna put that in under the gravel so that we can just come in and pave it? Or does it mean, well, if you're gonna pave it, now
Yeah.
you're going to rip the whole thing up?
Right.
You know,
That's
Well, and
probably
I-
a question
I
for
asked
Wolf to
about-
give us an opinion as to what they were thinking when,
well, and
But
that's,
this doesn't make sense the way it's written in here, because they say option 1 is a gravel parking lot with stalls,
Yep.
we refer to B.
Yep.
Option 2, new bituminous curb and gutter parking lot with the stalls. And that's the one that says, new parking lot could be paved in the future if desired. So,
right.
is that middle option a gravel parking lot with bituminous curb? That option 2 isn't clear to me what it is, because the way it's stated, it sounds like it could be gravel, but it's got a little bituminous edging, which,
and the other question
Not
comes
so
in there is that, once it becomes bituminous, what do we have to have for holding to,
well, that's already in the
Deal
design,
with
because I think the original
Yeah.
plan was to do it bituminous. Jump in here, Kim,
Right.
if you actually know anything about anything on this topic. I know you know a lot about a lot. Because if you look, my recollection, and I was not on facilities at the time, is we'd had to do
because the old
work with the
facilities
stormwater
list
bond.
that I have at home talks about a gravel parking, but without any ponding basin in it. I've got that at home from the original, from the facilities committee that I was on.
They have a
School board.
stormwater pond
That
I mean-
stormwater pond, I think, is there.
set up
Nope.
for it.
No, it's
That's
not.
where I'm
There's
looking
not,
at.
there's not
That's a
one there.
That-
that's
Right.
the one that's
soccer
over here.
Yeah, that's a
No,
soccer
there's
field.
not-
right?
there's
Oh, there's
nothing
one
There's
off
not
to
there.
the right.
But I
That
mean-
is- That is what is called Field 9 of
Right.
the soccer fields right
So
now.
the
It's a wide
stormwater
open
pond that's
grass
currently
area.
there is the one that's
Yep.
over.
But as we're talking
to
about
the
this with
east.
safety issues, I mean, I feel like we need to ensure that the parking lot is large enough to make sure there's no cars parked on that street. Because if we have a parking lot that's too small, the parking lot's going to get full, and then the street's going to get
And
full,
the other
right?
thing we need to consider also is that folks that are coming from out of town or bus traffic, we have to provide some kind of access for,
Mhm.
you know, if, whatever the parking size is there, so that we can get buses in.
I
at
don't see
least.
that's not a bus lot.
No, we've
No,
said,
not a bus lot, but a drop lot.
No.
well, no, we talked
buses-
about that at
buses drop at that
facilities.
lower paved
Yep.
lot.
That
Or
the
back
buses
Back by the
would
high school.
drop
I
down
would
there.
not- I would not use that.
Yeah,
for-
and for Little Raiders,
Bus
there's no,
drops.
Little Raiders is the one that I'm familiar with. I'm not
Okay.
saying this doesn't
Yeah,
occur for other
baseball
ones,
and
but
stuff.
Little Raiders is
The
all,
ones that I've seen outside, like, first student would bring in teams, and they want to figure out a way to turn around after they drop their kids.
Right,
there.
and they're just going to need to understand that that lower lot is where the buses have a turnaround.
Yeah, but they're
and
going
I haven't-
farther up.
I haven't seen buses transporting
Yeah.
up to these fields.
I have never seen a bus there. I mean, every time I've seen a bus for anything that has to do with any type of sports there, they always drop actually at the high school.
By the horticulture.
Right by the horticulture and the kids walk down.
Right.
Whether it be track, football, I've never
Middle
seen
school
them try to pack on the bar
cross-country.
side.
And as far as a gravel lot goes, you have to remember that with 129 stalls, it's a gravel lot. These are not marked
Yep.
stalls. Okay, so people are,
It's just a place to
people,
park.
people are gonna park willy-nilly,
Yep.
and they are not going to park as close to each other as you
Yeah.
would in a striped,
Yeah.
That's true.
parking lot. So 129 is probably going to be something,
A lot less than
something less than
129. Yeah,
but I'm
that's true.
with you, I agree that I want to make it a decent enough size that we don't have any reason to park on
Right.
the gravel road.
And I think,
Reduce the numbers somehow.
say again?
I'm looking over your shoulder to get some insight about maintenance on a bituminous lot, which we consistently spend money keeping our parking lots functional, versus gravel. Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, as far as maintenance on a gravel lot, it's not.
I mean, we're not gonna
you
plow
might
it in
have
the
some
winter,
gravel
we're not
coming
gonna do anything.
into the grass and you have to brush it back in. You might have an unsightly edge, but as far as a paved lot, that all depends on the install. If it's a quality install, then you might have $5,000 every 5 years or so, depending on cracks and things like that. So it's not a huge difference as far as money goes. It's easier to take care of a paved lot, staffing wise.
use would make a lot of difference on that, right?
Yes, it
Okay.
would.
Well, and this is a lot that would only be used during the summer
Summertime.
months, spring and
Right.
summer months.
Right.
So as long as it drains well, I mean, I don't feel strongly that it has to be a paved lot. The other question that I had is that when this was originally thought up, I thought we had said that there would be, part of why we need this is to provide accessibility.
Correct.
Okay, because on what would be the south side, which is the softball field, which is field 3, and the tennis courts, you have a paved pathway that they can take all the way to field 3, and then it's a short distance from there to field 5 or up to field 4 or what now would be relocated field 9. And then from what would be the north side, which is where we're proposing this piece, is there any thought about, it wouldn't take much to put in some type of pathway? Yes, it's grass. When it rains up there, it gets soggy. I mean, there's no getting around it, and it just does. So, just an additional thought. And I'm not saying we absolutely, we've got to have it, but again, I just think about the folks with walkers, the folks in wheelchairs, trying to get across the grass can sometimes be a challenge.
So, at the meeting, the most recent meeting where we met with Wald, they were saying that option 2 and option 3 were what you had originally spec'd out, a paved lot. The new option is option 1, to try to get greater value for the investment, to go gravel. They also took off some of the paths to try to reduce cost.
Okay.
And that's, I can't remember if that was facilities committee or the meeting with Wool where they talked about, we can reduce these extra paths running out there for now. And of course, you can add them back in, but they're trying to get you back on your budget, as the cost of doing these things are changing. So that's where we're at right now. I just can't remember which was facilities discussion and which was the last meeting that we had at Wall as far as the details on that.
So we were originally at this 333. Is that where we were originally so option 2, this is my understanding from what I'm hearing. Our option 2 used to be 333,800, and now over this 18 months it's jumped to $150,000.
Used to be the 335.
I think we had budgeted $400,000 for this project, is what we had as a big round number slapped into the bond proposal.
Well, it says at the top, the original
That was
construction
probably their- That was
budget,
probably their estimate with some contingency. I don't
Yeah.
think we would have put in
200 in
Something
it.
that
item down to the hundreds.
And I'm
And
just
that was
working
also
off memory. I thought
2017.
it
Yeah, I'm
was
just using
400.
that number
That's
because it's in
5,
front
it
of
was
me.
4 years ago, 3
Yeah.
years ago.
But I'm thankful that we are considering other options here, because just automatically saying, we have to pave it, because when you pave it, now comes, now we need to repave it, now we have to fill the cracks,
Oh, yeah.
now, you know.
Well, and will this lot actually, does it need to be paved?
Well, it's a spring and summer lot.
Yeah.
Right now, people are parking on
On the
a
gravel.
dusty
Mhm.
gravel road,
And
half
going
in the
through-
ditch.
Going through the
Right.
And
ditch.
walking through the ditch.
This is gonna be a massive upgrade,
Yeah.
no matter
Right.
which direction you go.
Okay.
I do hate to see us cut trails, because we can say, we'll come back and do that later, except we never will.
Right.
Well, and
Or
I don't,
access.
Right.
So, honestly, we've been getting relatively good bids across the board.
but
As a percent of the bond, I don't feel badly about putting this in at the original plan of a bituminous lot. And I would like to see us maintain some of the, I don't know what some is in this sentence, but some of the trails.
right, the question that I keep coming back to on the trails, I like the idea of them, but it's like, well, where do you lead it to?
Well, I know, but they
Okay.
had a plan.
Right.
We don't have it in our current pictures, but.
It's like, okay, for a baseball field, it makes sense where you would lead the trail to. But for a soccer field, well, where do you lead it to? Do you lead it to
Right.
the center of the field? Do you, you know?
Right.
Well, I
that's-
think you can, at a minimum, you should be connecting to the existing paved path.
So what you're saying, Lisa,
So
is
going between
basically-
6 and 5
Right,
at a minimum, and I know that that's
up to Grossman.
lower,
Yeah, you have to remember, there's a pretty big hill between,
Yeah,
as we're
so you'd
looking
be
at this
running
graph,
You'd be
between,
running at the edge of 6.
yeah, between field 6 and then to what would be
5.
the east of that.
Yeah.
There's
You know,
that sway-way or
there-
whatever you
it's,
call it.
it's a pretty
It's
steep
a
hill
hill.
because
It's
it
not
It
a
is,
sway
it's
on the
steep.
hill.
No, it's
So-
steep. So you'd either have to run it
You'd run it
on
at
the
the
low
top.
side. You run at the top, then you gotta come down if you're
Yeah.
going, if you're actually gonna connect it to the Grossman's roundabout.
Yep.
Which is-
I don't know, I'd like to see some, I'm just saying, I don't want us to give up access to some of these fields if the purpose was to give access, and I don't like us saying, oh, you know, it's better than what we got.
I don't disagree. The question is it gonna throw us way out of whack budgetarily?
So it's
You
a
know, we've got
$49
some
million
other-
bond.
Right, I
But
understand.
I'm
that.
not gonna get,
Where are we
wrapped
at
around
with
the
that,
axle.
and considering some
oh,
of the
we
other
should look at
things?
page 4 of our billing. of our
Right,
billing
but I mean,
stuff.
moving forward here, what's your opinion?
We pave it and put some trails in there.
How many trails, Lisa?
Well, I'd like to see a
What?
map of what we had originally and what was initially approved.
Well, for this decision, are we just making it on the parking lot for now, and then we can look at the trails
It'd be
through
a
the
bid to-
facilities
it'd be a bid
committee?
together.
Or is it together?
It'd be-
You could bid it either way.
You can bid it either way, but
If you
you're
want
gonna
the
get a
parking lot
better
done,
deal
they
if you
need
bid
to
it
bid.
together.
March.
If you bring
Well,
somebody
you
out there
may,
with not
But
May,
if we
you
have some
will.
other work to be done, that could be added in.
Did they
I-
give us any indication as to what a trail would cost? I mean, are we talking, oh, that adds 10, I mean, if you're going to make it gravel, are you gonna pave it? Because if you're gonna pave it, then you have to have the right subsoil underneath it and improvements there, all that. I mean, are we talking, and I think I know the answer to this, are we talking $10,000 or are we talking more like $80,000? Because my gut is telling me we're probably talking more like $80,000.
Yeah, I
And
have
at
no
that point,
idea.
I'm like, eh,
I feel like, unfortunately, we don't have the information that we need
right.
to move this to action today. So if this is supposed to be let in mid-March, we got a heck of a lot of special meetings coming up. I feel like we could have facilities meet with Wald and get answers to some of this.
Yeah.
And I don't care if this ends up being an action item at the work session.
Well, and I'm curious
Because I
too.
just don't have enough information. I mean, I have opinion,
So
but I don't have information right now.
Yeah.
between the gravel and the pave, my question is, if you put in gravel, is the subsoil, is it going to be improved to the point that the subsoil is correct, that then there would be little to no work to come in and pave it?
That's a question for Wold without
Right,
looking at it.
right.
I don't know.
Because, and what is the cost, so if we do all of it and we pave it and it's the 400 and whatever $1,000, well, how does that differ if we do gravel and then we come back later? If we do gravel for 300 and some $1,000 and then we come back later and we wanna pave it, well, is that gonna cost us, again, my gut says that's gonna cost
Another 300,000?
more, probably significantly
Right.
more than doing it
Yeah.
all the first time. So I kind of feel like if we're gonna do gravel, it's probably gonna stay gravel.
Yeah.
It is, just knowing, just from past experience of how these projects go.
Yeah, you're probably right about
Okay.
that.
For the usage in summer and spring and fall, I mean, a gravel lot would be sufficient. It'd be a lot better than what it is now.
I don't disagree. I'm just not sure that that's a sufficient that's a sufficient justification to not do whatever the right thing is here.
So for now, we are not ready to make a decision tonight, and we want to get the facilities committee together to discuss this.
Yep.
Am I hearing that correctly?
That would be my preference, and I think we need Wold there, and we probably need Cam there, or somebody representing facilities. You can set
When we
somebody
get to
else.
that point.
I mean, I hear your point, Scott, and I think that's valid. If we do gravel, we're just gonna end up going gravel.
We just need more info. Because even if we do gravel and they say, oh, the subsoil is okay, we're digging down X number of
Yeah.
feet and putting, well,
We're putting in 18 inches of
You,
gravel.
you can't just let rainwater run through the gravel and think that
3
that's
years
gonna
and then
stay.
think it's gonna be
I mean,
good.
they're gonna come in and say, oh,
Okay,
everything's
so
shifted,
we'll
now we need to tear it all up
just
and
talk
put it
about
all
it
in
again
place.
once
I
we
mean, I've
get
heard
there.
that song.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
look at the high school parking
That high
lot
school
where it was
parking lot,
paved,
that's where
and
we heard it.
they dug down into it and they said, oh, nope, sorry, gotta, you know, dig
All right.
down whatever it was, 3 feet or.
I know,
Alright.
that's crazy.
So then for now, we will move on for an update on the high school student support request.
So the only attachment I put in there now ties back to the conversation we had at the last work session, where Mike Johnson and high school and admin team and student support professionals provided a presentation and talked about some current need for short-term support at the high school level. And at that time, there were a few follow-up conversations. One was this is a part of a bigger picture and a longer-term effort to make sure we have the resources in place to support students district-wide, and perhaps some discussion about assessing what's already out there in place and how is it working. Are we maximizing those things? So one of the things that was a follow-up was Dave Haveman provided this resource support, which was done previously, kind of organizing what are all those resources that have been pulled together one at a time, and now it makes a composite picture. So that's a good thing to look at, not only in this context, but also moving forward. And it appears that the March 11th work session will dedicate a fair amount of time to the big picture moving forward, and it will include a orientation by Renee Sterno about what service they provide, which is part of that big picture. So this is just a good document. You know, you can print it out. It is large and landscape, so it might be a good one that you actually have printed out to refer to. I've already started using it because it's very helpful to me. To get back to the original discussion after the presentation, there was discussion around the board that, well, what process would we follow to consider this request? And being it was a work session and we weren't able to take action, we discussed that I could authorize, as a superintendent could authorize the high school staff to post positions that they may want to consider attracting an applicant pool to see who is out there in this timeline, and also to talk to recently retired staff or other people, because it seemed like the greatest need, the greatest benefit was somebody who can process with kids, sort through what the concerns are, get them to the right specialist, get them to the right place, you know, 2 eyes, 2 ears, all that kind of stuff. So, and following through since the work session, Mike has let me know that some of the leads that they followed up on retired people and whatnot were not successful. Apparently, retired people think twice about coming back. Funny how that works. So they did go ahead and post just a school counselor position, and did draw a pool and did interview at least one candidate. I'm going to invite Mike to share how the interview process went. And I know that he is at the point where they would like to make a recommendation for a defined period hire for the end of the year. I shared with the board through email earlier today what that staffing cost would be, and then it would be additional benefits if they chose to take any of the benefit packages in that defined period. And so we can give you an identified cost of what that would be. But to go back to the work session, that was all that was kind of by consensus of the board, was explore it. It's not an action item today. It could become an action item now or in the future. And of course, delaying action on it lessens any potential impact of having that resource. But in a work session, that's as far as we could get. I've kind of summarized how much further we went from that point. And if Mike is here, there he is. You can certainly ask questions and decide where, how the board would like to proceed on even just discussing or considering this.
I guess I have a question. If we get the right candidate in, am I hearing correctly that we are not going to wait till our next board meeting, not our work session, but our next board meeting to approve this, right? If we find the right person, we are going to move forward. As part of the tactical, again, last time we talked about tactical, strategic.
Correct.
I'm very much in tactical mode right now, which is, if we find the right person, let's go.
Agreed.
Right?
Because this is off budget, we should have board action if you want to, rather than having superintendent authorize it and then you approve it on the consent agenda, because it's off budget, we shouldn't proceed until the board has actually voted
Okay.
on it and approved it.
So
authorized
then,
it.
Looking at
so then
special-
what methods do we have to make, what methods do we have to move forward if this were to come to fruition between now and the next board meeting? Can we do this at a work session, because that's a couple weeks away, or can we do this via a special session? I mean, I'm
Here's
sure
my
we can do it
question.
via a
If
special
we,
session.
if we move it to an action item, can we not then, as an action item, then vote on it tonight?
Yes, and that's, Mike can give you an update on where he's at.
That's
He is
what
ready
we
with the
should do.
recommendation, but we didn't put the recommendation in here because we didn't know if you wanted, if you
Got
were
it.
ready to entertain his recommendation.
Well, then can we move it to an action item and then have Mike speak on it then?
You
Or
can
do
make
it-
a
or
motion.
should we-
you can speak
I
on it
would-
now.
I would have him
Let's
speak on it now.
Right, okay.
Right.
But I want to understand too is, I mean, I appreciate that you're going to bring a recommendation. I'd like to understand how, as part of that presentation, how we got to that recommendation, because I feel like when we walked out of the work session, permanently hiring a counselor was not the first pick.
Yeah, I
We
don't
were
think-
looking at, asking to look at other either available resources or a consultant or contractor, because I want to understand how this is, the actual recommendation, not just what it is, how it was chosen, and what other alternatives were
But as I understand,
considered, and then I want to be super sure that this doesn't have a tail.
right,
Exact
but
same concerns I had in March. or
this,
had in
this
March.
hire would have a specific end date.
Well, it would
there
have
is
to
an
be
end
hired
date.
with a non-renewal. They'd have to be non-renewed. But I want to understand before we get to this hire as the recommendation, if that's in fact the recommendation, what other considerations were given. Because what I heard is, yeah, we'd like a human that's competent with young adults to kind of help triage. But I also heard that maybe that was hadn't been a fully coordinated evaluation in terms of other resources available and other ways to fund it. So I just want to be clear on how we got to whatever the recommendation might be. And
I think we need to hear from Mr. Johnson.
So do we,
I'm just saying what I
discuss
want
it
to hear
now,
from
or do
him.
we
I
have
want
to
to hear
move
that.
it?
Let's
No,
hear from
we
Mr.
can-
Johnson.
We can hear from Mike now, and then we can make a
Move it.
decision on the action item.
And also, before you may move it to an action item, Dave is here as well, and if you have questions about how are we using those resources that we have, and he did also do some follow-up on checking on adding specialist time along the way, and he has an update on that. And I think Mike's summary of how he's followed through since that presentation would be great. Probably better not to use, if you have a recommended candidate, to use their name until, you'd be authorized to make an offer.
So when we were here,
just before we go too far, for the sake of the broadcast, can you come on up by the mic? Can you, I mean, you can have my chair.
Absolutely, get my chair, Mike. It's close.
The mic is right here
There's a
at
mic right
at the
That's fine.
podium.
We got it.
he doesn't have
am
a.
I close enough?
Right, just
All right.
just right here. Because sometimes it doesn't, this way folks at home can hear.
No, great. When we were at the board meeting, I really appreciated your support, willingness to look at options. We were kind of casting a net to see who may be out there. We recognize that we do have some wonderful people, and at the same time, we're trying to rely on some professional skills to be able to hand off when we just have had the overwhelm in our student office as well as the counseling office. We had talked to trying to capitalize on some of our retirees who have experience in this area, whether it be a school counselor or someone that works school psychologist. We had reached out to Renee Sterno to see if he had someone who might have both the experience and the skills. Dave had reached out to Canvas Health and 360s, and what we were at is, if you remember the tiered levels of supports, Tier 1, 2, and 3, we're looking for someone who is Tier 1, that knowing that we have some wonderful people who are Tier 2 and who are Tier 3 supports, like a social worker, like a counselor, like Canvas Health. The students are not scheduling their panic attacks. They're not scheduling when they're having ideation. They're not scheduling the behavior. So that's the piece where we said we need someone who can be present within our school. And so we checked our contacts, and people, as Jeff said, they are retired for a reason. We did not find people. We decided to post it. With this counselor, we knew that there were people that were graduating in January from school counselor positions to see what was out there. We didn't receive a lot of candidates who could start right now. We have people who are completing their internship in school counseling, and we did have a couple of people that are currently licensed as a school counselor, one of which that we've met and interviewed who works with students who are in special services between a high school setting and a full college setting, kind of that transition piece that's there. Also has worked in some residential youth facilities and trying to manage student behaviors. Went back as an adult to get a master's degree in school counseling, and now has 3 years of intensive counseling as a kind of a college residential counselor. The person does know exactly where we stand and what we're looking for, that this would be done on June 5th, the last day of school. It would be, as soon as the person would be hired, they'd probably be non-renewed on April 1st. And this is a person that's willing to take a professional leap of faith because they want to get into a school, high school setting, work with a broad range, use that broad base of licensure, and feels this could be a pretty good option.
That was really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that covers the items that we talked about last time. So
Right.
thanks for being so thorough and
Yep.
follow up.
And this really
Beating the
is,
bushes.
as you were saying, this is the tactical until the end of our school year. So there is not a tail that's expected. We know that we want to talk about that, and that may, who knows what that will look like.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mike or even,
Yeah,
you know,
Dave, do you
Dave?
have anything to share on your insights through this evaluation process?
No, as Mike indicated, I reached out to 360 Communities and Canvas Health. 360 Communities provides a family resource worker for 2 of our elementary schools. And as I talked to Lisa Lux from 360, she's their supervisor, she indicated that with our new community in the schools position over at the high school, really, that's an agency in a position that does the exact same thing as 360 does. And so really, since we have that underway and starting, they didn't want to have an overlap that would be too messy with just a couple of months left in the school year. As far as the mental health goes, when I was hearing the work session, the presentation by Mike and his team on some of the significant mental health needs, that's why I reached out to Canvas Health, because I figured we already have 3 TAP therapists through Canvas Health right now on contract to supply mental health therapy in our schools. With, you know, they can do a caseload of about 13 kids each. And Carolyn Felty is their supervisor, and she decided, or she is looking into whether or not she can provide additional mental health therapy to us right now. There's no guarantee that she has the person that can supply that right now under the timeline that we need that to happen. However, it could be on an outpatient basis, but as Mike said too, it would be more of a tier 3 type position. It would be definitely for the most needy students there, not a larger swath of students. Unfortunately, we can use more mental health all over the district. That's why when I presented after Mike at the last work session, like, we have needs everywhere. Unfortunately, we're like every other district that way in that respect. And so mental health is probably the biggest agenda item on all, you know, agendas when it comes to directors that I meet with in the county. And we're no different in that way, unfortunately. I wish we were. But the document that you referenced a few minutes ago wasn't meant to get as large as it did. We started that document in the fall, and the reason we started that document in the fall is we had 2 new people that were starting with us in different roles this fall. Molly Cirillo is our family resource coordinator for the district. Maddie Pearson was a new social worker with us this fall. And as they were asking good questions about all the people that we have working in mental health from tier 1 to tier 3, we wanted to have a reference document that we could start spelling out to people like school counselors, what does everybody do, where's the overlap? But we also meant for this to be a document that over time we could see where the gaps were, so that we can plan in a big picture format for the district, like what is it that we're not hitting with all these people. But if you look at the document, we have a lot of people that do a lot of things regarding mental health, so I'm proud of the staffing that we have. Is it enough for the mental health right now? I would say probably not, but we've got a lot of good people. We just have some gaps we still have to hit.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
So if we do want to move this to an action item tonight, any director can make that motion, and then we could
I want to make
take
a
care of that
motion
tonight
that
if
we
we're
move to
comfortable.
an action item.
I second.
Okay. Is there any discussion about that? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? All right, motion carries. All right,
When we get to the March 11th work session, and Jeff, you talked about this being a substantive portion of that
mhm.
item, will have Renee, will we also have Dave and
David,
some
Sarah, planning on
administrators
being there.
that'll help us look systemically? I really want to assure
Yeah.
that we're providing equitable resources across sites and that we're not,
Yeah.
while it's important to respond to critical events, I want to make sure that we're making
Right.
good, well-resourced decisions district-wide. And the reality is we have to make those against everything else that we're supposed to do as a district from a budgetary perspective. So.
Right, and I agree, this was a kind of a crisis moment. We needed to act fast on this, but we do need to look kind of system-wide and district-wide at what we need to be doing long-term here. So that will be kind of the work session next month. So, okay. So next up is the policy first reads. So the policy committee met, I guess it's been about 2 weeks now, and we're kind of starting with going through our 200 level policies and talking about which policies we may be missing, which policies we can just look back over and okay. And so these were policies that needed to be added, and so this is the first review, the first reading of them coming to the board now.
So there are new policies that we didn't have, which are kind of critical for board operation. Doesn't mean you weren't operating in the manner the policies subscribed, but they weren't in the prescribed. They weren't in the policy manual, including the policy on adopting policies. The one that's in as a review, because it would have substantive changes, is the public participation. So the committee has highlighted what they would like to change, or what they're recommending to change in the public participation. Under the potential policy 208, the board would have the option of approving revised policies that don't have substantial changes in the first time that they're read, and they would have the option of approving and adopting new or substantially revised policies after 2 readings, which doesn't mean you have to after 2, but you have to have at least 2 separate meetings where you do a public reading so that there could be comment and people are aware of what's going on. So the review is, or the public participation policy has enough modification that it would need at least 2 readings.
And then there are 3 documents here, so bear with me. I know there are people who are following along, and I'm not quite sure which one I need to click to show where our changes are.
206. Just
Right.
the regular one, not the
Not the OG. Okay.
So
Page 4, Kelsey.
are we discussed? I just want to point out that in 203.2, which is prior to 206, the agenda, the order of business or order of the agenda does not match our current practice, and it's in the details. I mean, I have some sort of detailing things in each of these, but we're not. Are we going to do recognition of visitors, correspondence, and public comment? Is that based on the premise that 208 is going to pass and the proposed, or excuse me, 206 is going to pass?
Yes. So no, this is not our current practice. Currently, we don't have a policy that sets up what the order of a board meeting
No, I know we
would
don't
be.
have this agenda.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that list of items
Right.
doesn't match what we're currently doing.
that. Correct.
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so
But
we
that's
went
what you're
through-
proposing. That's what the policy committee is
Correct.
proposing to be done.
Yeah. We went through all of MSBA's recommendations, and then the highlighted items that you see here are what we modified to fit, what we thought would fit our needs.
And is the assumption that if MSBA has a policy on it, we want a policy on it? Was that the presumption of the policy committee, or
Not
were there some that you
necessarily.
didn't take
Not necessarily, but.
in 200?
Not all of them. We, definitely mandatory ones. We're gonna have those.
All right, fine. Go ahead and be the boss
But there
of
were,
me.
there were quite a few that we thought, just for having a standard that we wanted to implement.
Right. And there were quite a few changes, and so all of the policies are on board book for people to review. Some of the big changes in policy 206, we're talking about, currently our practice is requiring 48 hours notice if someone wants to address the board at a meeting, and how it needs to be on an agenda item. And so we had a lot of discussions about that, and so we were kind of,
If it's not an agenda item, they come before.
I
so
didn't-
it would be at
yeah,
the,
I looked at the request to speak, and there's actually a checkbox there that says, is this related to an agenda item or not? Yes or no. It doesn't restrict anyone from speaking on anything that isn't an agenda item in there that I saw. And this is our current policy.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, you can speak
Not
on anything.
not
You just
in
have to-
206. It's the precursor to 206. It's the request to speak. Now, it does have the 48-hour piece, which can be, I mean, we've waived that in the past, and I would be just fine with waiving that. I did have a question here, too, on the order, because we have recognition of visitors, correspondence, and public comment all lumped together. And if we are going to have somebody commenting on something that is on the agenda, I think it would make more sense to allow them to comment after the item is open for discussion, rather than, if it's item G and,
Right.
the third thing is public comment, it kind of comes out of context and may lose some of its meaning.
Sure.
I agree, and I believe we discussed that too, so the public comment piece, like if we know that somebody's gonna be coming in and they have a part that they wanna talk about that is specific to the agenda, that it would make sense for flow and.
Yeah, I want them to have I want people to have the context. It's not very meaningful if we allow them to comment on something that hasn't even been brought up by the board,
I agree.
and then half an hour later, the board brings
Right.
it up.
right, and so one of the reasons we had put the public comment piece in the beginning is kind of how our city council does that now, and people can get up and they can speak on a topic that's not on the agenda, and it's their opportunity to bring something up to the whole board in a public setting, and the board acknowledges it, and it's not that there is action on what they're speaking on, but they are able to get in front of the board.
So at whatever point you do
Except-
revise,
That doesn't align with 206 as you proposed it. Right, 206 as it's proposed is that board listening sessions will occur prior to the board meeting and are not on the regular board
That is a
agenda.
separate thing.
Yes, right now, we already have in our policy that there are board listening
Yes.
sessions
Right, no, I know
beforehand.
that. But the public comment, so again, the public comment's not a standalone item in the order of the meeting, right? Where if you're speaking at the meeting, you're speaking on an agenda item. The listening session is if it's a non-agenda item. That's how I read this policy.
No, you can also speak at the meeting on a non-agenda
Non-agenda
item.
item.
Right.
But if you do not feel comfortable speaking publicly at the meeting and on TV, you can meet with a board member beforehand.
That was not evident to me when I read it. I read it as agenda, public comment, agenda, because it's under agenda items, how you respond to agenda items, and, 6A is agenda items, and that's how you speak at the meeting. And then listening sessions is non-agenda items.
I can
So
see
maybe
how
that's
you would
just a
come to that
clarity,
conclusion.
maybe it's just a clarity of titling or outlining.
Yeah, think of it
But I
as two
saw-
separate things that, yeah.
It looked like two separate things to me when I read it, not
Mhm.
having
Yeah, and I
been in the
think that-
context of your
I think we
conversation.
clean that up
Yeah.
to make it a little clearer
Mhm.
for, obviously yourself and also the public.
So will the request to address the school board document, I'm looking at it right now, will that stand with the exception of the at least 48 hours prior to the board meeting?
so
the listing of this item talks about participation addendum, and I believe the goal of the committee was to work through with the full board to approve a revised policy 206 for participation, and then to come back later and basically come up with an addendum that is the cliff notes for somebody who wants to participate, can look at it and it tells them exactly what they need to do to participate. Policies for the board, but the addendum is what you literally show somebody who wants to participate, so they can say, I want to address the board, here's what I need to do.
Yeah, and
Right.
that's what the
Craft
request
that-
to, that's what this
the
document
Hastings
is.
customized
Right,
style.
because in a perfect world, we do want to be notified, I mean, as much as humanly
Well,
possible.
and honestly, we sort of want to know, I want to know, that the person's followed a little bit of a chain of command. I don't want them to have a conflict or a question, and then the first thing they do is they want to come talk to the board. I'd like them to say, okay, I'm gonna talk to the principal, if I feel like I need support on that, I'm gonna look at ways to get support, and much like, that, how you're gonna talk to coaches that we sign 3 times a year.
I mean, the 24-hour rule and all
The
that.
24-hour rule, and not right after a game, and all
Right,
that kind of stuff.
right.
I mean, in a way that's similar to that, and I do think that's one of the things that I felt like is a good takeaway from our request, is just to ask people to be responsible and do some work leading up to it, which also allows
Yeah.
our administrators to prepare documents to
Yeah.
support the
Well, I
conversation.
like this because it has them acknowledge that they've read School District Policy 206, which is really super important from a legal standpoint,
Absolutely.
based on what they can and cannot say, and
Fair.
how we have an obligation to stop someone
If they
if
start to
if
get
they
close to
are
the line.
wandering.
Right.
And that
Okay?
is something that we discussed, that during our meetings, we will, before every meeting, have a disclosure of, if you are gonna make public comment, these are the criteria, and the chairperson has the ability to stop you if you violate that.
Right, and I think some of that verbiage could come right out of here. And the 48-hour thing, look at this agenda as an example. I mean, how many changes
we
did we
can't
have
get
to
ahead of
this? I mean,
Not
it's
ahead of
it's
the
just
plan
not,
right
and
now.
we've waived that in the past, so to me, it doesn't, I mean, the 48-hour thing just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Sure.
And so the addendum would really kind of lay out, say, when you come in, you would sign in, you could say what you're speaking about, what the topic is, and then Becky would kind of see all of that beforehand, and so we would have an idea beforehand what people are
Right.
getting up there to
Right.
speak about.
And by using
And
this
the-
document, it also gives them some very important things here. What would you like the school board or administration to do in response to your
Yeah,
comments?
is there a solution?
And then it also gives us contact information so that we can reach back out to this person,
Mhm.
as
Absolutely.
as
Do a follow-up.
requested, to follow up on these things, so.
And we
Yeah.
also made sure that we considered the fact that you might have a lot of folks to come in have a common theme, and how rather than having every single person speak on that common
Well-
theme, that they'd have to coalesce around.
Right.
So maybe
And
it's
to
each
Lisa's
person.
point
So-
about following some process, there's also a section in here about what district personnel have you contacted about this issue.
Yeah.
Not saying that if you
you
haven't
resolve it.
contacted anybody that you're not allowed to speak, just saying,
Yeah.
we'd like to understand,
Mhm.
who have you talked to about this? What,
Well, no, that helps us help
yeah,
everybody.
it helps us,
Because we know the history.
Right.
yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well,
There's no
and
question about it.
Two points. One, on the public comments, especially if it's the same topic, I think many districts, many in this case is Stillwater, I think I only looked at one, limit the period of time available for public comment,
Mhm.
and individually and in total.
Right.
So you don't just take, 50 people come, you gotta get here early enough to get your name in there, and you gotta be
Sure.
done before the available time. So some clarity about that would be good, so people understand. And then I had one other question on the listening sessions. Again, taking this as any non-agenda item, which is how I read it. Is that saying that somebody will always be here? 15 minutes? 2 people will always
Two
be
of
here?
us.
Will always
Correct.
be here?
Yeah, I think we already have
Yeah.
that as a
We do,
policy.
but it's not always. This to me read like, we're just gonna have 2 people here and ready in
Right.
case you come.
No,
Right
I
now
think it is
it's-
always.
I think you still have to request.
Right now, it still
No,
says
it's-
48 hours
You
notice,
still
and
have
the
48
board
hours
member
notice.
will
So
be
then it
there.
was like, okay, who can get there early? Like if somebody
Right.
has to speak, who can get there early? This I read is like, just always there's gonna be 2 people
Yep.
here. So will that be like an assigned?
Yeah,
The point.
That's what we
this
talked
is-
about, yes.
It's basically a rotating schedule, and there will be.
I just
two
wanted clarity on
directors.
that, cause this was
Please let me
substantively different.
finish. there will be at least 2 directors available for a certain time element before the official meeting starts.
Yep, and I was just sharing how I read it, because obviously how I was reading some of the topics didn't align with the intent of the policy committee. So, okay.
Okay.
So as a summary, I see a bunch of things that are highlighted here. I'm looking at the policy 206 proposed.
Which page?
I am on
4?
item number 6, so
Page 4.
procedures for requesting to address the board. Yep, that actually.
That's
Can
the
you give us a
first.
summary of what the difference is between this and what we currently have? Just, I'm not
Yeah.
looking for.
I wish I could pull them up.
I know,
side
that's what I
by-
was looking for,
Side
too.
by side. Because if I do it, it will change everyone's screen. So can someone else pull
I
that
have
up?
it.
Oh,
Okay.
fantastic.
Let
So
me
you'll pull
find
up the
your
old one?
page. Yes, I have it right here. I don't mind my notes on it. So.
Because I did the flip back and forth thing, and I just
No,
didn't
I
see,
kept
I didn't
getting
see a
lost.
lot
I
of
don't want to get
differences
everyone
here.
sick if I start to do that.
No, I know,
so
and
we'll
the whole paragraphs are highlighted, and I wasn't clear that that
Yeah.
was all
So you can
different.
see in the old
Oh,
one, there was
Stephanie.
that 48-hour period.
Yep, so that's
Right,
gone,
so
or
that is-
proposed to be gone.
Correct.
Yep.
What does the second paragraph discuss?
The school board chair. So first one is citizens who wish to address the board on agenda item may speak during the public comment
Mhm.
period in accordance with policy 206 addendum. So policy 206 addendum would be
Mhm.
whatever we come up with,
The
the
process.
request to,
Right.
whatever we want to call it. Item 2 is the school board chair will recognize one speaker at a time. Rule of order, speakers who are not recognized, only those who are recognized by the chair will be allowed to speak. Comments by others are out of order. Individuals who interfere or interrupt speakers, school board, or proceedings may be directed to leave.
No change.
Okay, so that's really not highlighted.
Really not highlighted.
So item 3 is the school board retains the discretion to limit discussion of any agenda item to a reasonable period of time as determined by the school board. If a group or organization wishes to address the school board on a topic, the school board reserves the right to require designation of one or more representatives or spokespersons to speak on behalf of the group or organization.
No change.
Okay, so item 3, okay,
It's
so,
not really-
Yeah.
Yeah, so I
4
think
is
we've just
matters.
highlighted too much.
Yeah, maybe, so let's find out here, so we've come this far.
Yep.
So when it comes back and that,
And I'm on a roll. I've had a lot of caffeine
You're doing a
today.
great
So
job.
matters. So item 4 is matters proposed for placement on the agenda, which may involve data privacy concerns, which may involve preliminary allegations, or which may be potentially libelous or slanderous in nature, shall not be considered in public, but shall be processed as determined by the school board in accordance with governing law.
No change.
Item 5, the school board chair shall promptly rule out of order any discussion by any person, including school board members, that would violate the provisions of state or federal law, this policy, or the statutory rights of privacy of an individual.
No change.
Number 6, personal attacks by anyone addressing the school board are unacceptable. Persistence in such remarks by an individual shall terminate that person's privilege to address the school board.
No change.
Item 7, depending upon the number of persons in attendance seeking to be heard, the school board reserves the right to impose such other limitations and restrictions as necessary in order to provide an orderly, efficient, and fair opportunity for those present to be
No
heard.
change. But
Okay.
with 7, Lisa, was it you that had mentioned
the,
potentially putting a time limit?
Yeah, and does
Would
that,
that just be part of the addendum?
yeah, I don't
Or
know if
should
it
that
belongs
be
in
here?
7 or if it
Yeah.
belongs in 1.
So what
Just saying a cumulative, like a length of an
Right.
individual and a cumulative length of time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those exist. I know that exists in Stillwater. I think we, the policy committee, could look for some examples and
Gotcha.
just add a little
It's probably
specificity about
7.
that.
Gotcha.
But
Okay,
we can
so to
discuss it.
clarify, the reason they are highlighted is because they are different than the MSBA's original policy document, not that it's different from
Not that it's
ours.
different than
Okay.
what we
Law
have
Correct.
already in
Theirs.
adoption.
Correct.
Okay. All right,
Thank
so
you.
really, yeah, because I was looking at this, I'm like, okay, what am I
No.
missing?
I was
as
like, we didn't
bouncing back
change
and
that
forth.
much.
Yeah, it was just the 48-hour thing, so,
Okay.
dropped into the MSBA template.
Okay.
thank you. I know that was a ton of reading, but I think that helps clarify, at least for me, so.
Right. All right. So, is there any more discussion on these policies? And we'll just keep taking notes and figure out, what tweaks to be made and.
I think they look pretty good. Thank you to the policy committee for the work you've done.
We'll move to a second reading for the next meeting.
All right. So those will move to a second reading at the next meeting. So moving on then. Where am I at? Got academic school calendar here.
So as I hit the ground running and tried to catch up to things that I wasn't a part of, this is one that I haven't had the opportunity to catch up to at all, is the calendar group that works through the calendar has prepared a draft for the 21-22 school calendar. And I think it's great. It's very helpful to have a calendar for the upcoming year and then a whole year and a half out. That's great timing. Some districts will do a tentative calendar a year and a half out and then come back when it gets closer and finalize it in case there needed to be any changes. I don't know what your process has been in the past. I'm not even sure who all participates in making this calendar. But Becky shared that it was ready for the board, so it's here on whatever timetable you're used to taking these. This is the draft made by the group. And you probably all know more about it than me.
What is the timing on making decisions around this?
We do approve them pretty far ahead. Yep.
Usually,
We'll modify
usually
when
a
it's
couple years
specific.
out for planning purposes
Yep.
is what we try to provide for not only our staff, but for our families.
Right, and then if there are changes that need to be made, if an administrator comes to us and says, we're looking to do extra staff development this day for some reason, then we can make changes to it. But we do try to get the overall calendar done.
Yeah.
ahead
So
of
this
time.
one's up for discussion now?
It's discussion because it was brought to me and not to you yet. So I wanted to get on your discussion list so you were aware that the group, whatever it's
Feels like
called,
they're done.
has,
They call it the calendar,
is
whatever
is
they are.
turning this over for your consideration. You could move it to an action item and approve it today, but being you haven't seen it, maybe you just want to pick a date, like the next meeting or another meeting where this will be an action item and you've had a chance to look at it. I'm very complimentary of the fact that you're a year and a half out on this. The only caution I would put out there, and you maybe all think of this anyway, is you want to make sure everybody in the community knows when you have a final calendar, because they will buy plane tickets, they will do everything off of it, and you don't want to be changing it every 2 months. It gets too much for people to handle, these different versions. So I take it when you're ready to take it, when you feel like it's.
I think I'd like to see, since this is fresh and new, I'd like to say that we could, spend some time at review and ask that this be brought up at the next regular meeting for a first go-round and comment by the board, moving that forward for action after that comment period.
Place it as discussion for next meeting or place it for action next meeting?
I'd go straight to action.
Yeah, I think straight to
Action.
action.
But
If
in
we're
the
going
end-
straight to action, then I've got a couple of things I want to ask about the calendar tonight then.
Likewise.
So if that's the case, then I'd rather discuss some of it now,
Okay.
if that's the case.
I guess my original intent was to review, and then before we acted on it at the next regular meeting, we would have a board discussion
Mhm.
on what to do and then act accordingly or put it off.
Got it, that's fine too. Either way, I'm good.
I will add, and this is unrelated, this is marginally related to the specific calendar, and Scott helped me out because this was part of teacher negotiations. In our current contract year, 2019 to 2021, we do have a memorandum of understanding that granted a couple additional workshop half-days. My take of that in the negotiations was there was a conversation about districts having sort of alternative schedules, whatever that looks like. Every 7th Wednesday that starts with the letter, whatever. It's an even number. We'll start school 20 minutes late and we'll have prep time or we'll have PLC time or we'll have something. I mean, it's very flippant, but it was, there's conversations about different districts are approaching this teacher workload thing a little bit differently. Our approach, because we didn't have time to really study that within the context of negotiations, was to grant these 2 additional half workshop days. This feels like a good time for somebody. I mean, it sounds to me like maybe, I mean, I want to use calendar committee, but that they may not be the right people to do an evaluation between now and some time and say, are we on an okay calendar? Is there a different way to do this than workshop days sprinkled throughout the year? And maybe the answer is we looked at it and this works best for us.
Who's the
But I don't
calendar
want
committee?
us to be in negotiations. It's Mike Johnson as the teacher.
Oh.
Okay.
Did you have something to say?
We're on the calendar committee.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna
That's
say,
what I was gonna
it's
say.
you
Oh,
and
the
the
calendar
teachers,
committee
right?
is
I don't know
here.
what's the calendar committee. Members of the calendar committee. And I don't know that the calendar committee is the right group, but that was a topic of conversation. It was one of the last resolved items.
Okay.
Was it?
So,
I'm trying to look up that
Okay, so
MOU.
I have a question while
Oh.
Scott's doing that regarding the calendar. This has bugged me for a little while, so I'm curious as to why it's this way. We have Martin Luther King Day, which falls into January, and then President's Day, which falls a month later into that. Martin Luther King Day is a district work day. President's Day is not. I'm wondering why the decision was made, since Martin Luther King Day is a national day of volunteering and all the teachers are locked down and none of them can do it, nor parts of their families if they're tied up doing that, as opposed to President's Day. Why aren't they flipped? Why isn't President's Day the workshop day and Martin Luther King Day the day where the teachers are actually not required to be at work?
President's Day is a legal holiday in many employee contracts. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is not.
it's by name in some of the contracts.
Fascinating.
Are you finding it,
I
Sam?
did find it, yep.
Okay, I'm closing in on it, but I
So
can tell you
for the
started
contract
correctly.
ending June 30th, 2019,
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah. Just through this year, this calendar for the school year shall consist of 176 and 6 staff workshop days, 4 staff development days for a total of 184. These days may be a half-day staff development and a half-day workshop in some cases. So I don't see
There's
no,
not.
that's one MOU, collapsed classroom, no.
Do you remember
Splitting
that conversation,
compensation. I do, and
And
yeah, there's no more MOUs, so either we,
did we embed it in the contract? Maybe I misspoke, maybe it's not.
no, I think it would have been an MOU because of our disdain for half-days.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I found. And that's the MOU between admin and Hastings regarding workshop/staff development days.
Right. And so the other option is next month, this can be a discussion item, once people have had more time to look it over, and at that point, we can move it to an action item if we feel comfortable with it.
I'll buy that too.
Yeah. So if we want more time to look at it or to,
And we can have some thought and discussion about this without being rushed to it. Right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and it gives people a chance to comment if they'd like.
Right.
Rather than, wham, bam, it's in.
Right.
That's that. Yeah, I was slightly confused when I looked at this, because I was thinking that that 2021 was the year that we were starting before Labor Day. So that,
Oh,
but that's this
This-
year.
that's
That's
this coming
this,
20.
that's this coming year that we start,
2021.
and then we're done like the 4th of June,
Yeah.
so that we give maximum
The
runway.
2021.
Yeah, well, yeah, we give maximum runway during the summer for construction projects.
Okay. So then we'll move this to discussion for next month, and then from there, we can move it on
To an
to an action item if we're comfortable. All right. Administrative reports.
All right, so on to the construction fund update. We have 2 change orders to consider. We met last week with Wold, and I'm going to enlist the help of Cam Peterson and Jen Subert here as we go through these. But change order 10. and change order 9 are attached there. So one of them has to do with a claim and trying to close out a claim that we have, and the other one has to do with a long list of miscellaneous things that need to be added to the project, things that were discovered when areas were revealed, different cabling, different materials. And I actually remember hearing about that whole list back in December, and I know that there was very little discussion about that. There were things that just had to be done. They're part of the contingency balance that you put in there, that you don't know what's behind door number 2 until you open up door number 2. So that's a small impact. The larger one is the claim, and I'll need help because I wasn't part of these earlier discussions. But there was a claim that in the original bidding between a contractor that thought they were on a different timeline and was going to do work later in the project. The scope of this project needed to be done earlier, and so when they were asked to move up the completion date, they added costs. And the initial added cost for overtime and other factors was $172,000. Wold has worked back and forth with them, item by item, to say, yes, that's a legitimate overtime that you had to do because of this misunderstanding, you moved up the completion time. And they go back and forth until they finally have it down at $92,000. And at this point, Wold is recommending that for $92,000 in additional costs, you basically bought the completion time. Because the other outcome would be they would complete it later when they thought they were supposed to, and it would change the calendar for completion, and it also disrupts the order of people working on their bids, the sequence of that. So, because I'm coming to this late, I understand the big picture. I don't understand the details because I wasn't a part of the original bidding and everything, but it's 2 change orders. One for the miscellaneous extra materials that are basically contingency, and one is to settle the claim at $92,000 to buy the work to get done on time. They're both extra expenses. They're both estimated in your original bond package that you're gonna have all these change orders, you're gonna have all these contingency costs, and they like to label them different things, contingency, soft costs, costs, district costs, they put different titles on them. So to break down these 2 change orders, if you have questions, I'll need help for Jen or Cam to explain the details because they're gonna know them better than me.
I was looking at change order number 9, which has more of the miscellaneous, okay? And again, I want to recognize that there's both additions and deductions in here, okay? So there's additions is, 500 here, 12,000 there, but then there's a pretty big deduction of almost $14,000 too. So as per normal, it's not just a one-way street. But the one that kind of stuck out to me was PR number 94, replace non-compliant backbone voice cabling. And that was an addition of over $40,000. And that's a lot, 40 grand, and I know copper's expensive, but $40,000 is a lot of money, which tells me that there was a whole lot of cabling, which begs the question, did nobody look at this cabling when they did the bid?
Is this something that came out and it was assumed that cable was of a certain quality or class? Because it seems to me we've heard this discussion before, especially about that, and that once they had ripped into it and realized that, no, instead of just doing a portion, now all the cabling had to go,
and that's
right?
my question. That's my question is, okay, the main trunk line. Okay, so how the main trunk line will run from controllers to various areas, and then it splits off from there. So did they look at some of the splits, and that is compliant cable, and it's just the main trunk line that was hidden, or did nobody look at it? Or it's just a very significant number, as we're looking at between these two. I mean, we're roughly $200,000 in ads. you know, which is significant to the overall project because it then takes us to about $700,000 over our original.
Mhm.
You know, which again, we're dealing with a $20 million, almost $21 million initial bid. So I'm not criticizing that we're off, but I'm curious, that one coming from IT, I'm just kind of raised my eyebrow at that one going, wait a minute, did no one look at this or was no one able to look at this?
I'm wondering if no one was able to look at it. I gotta believe that somebody, Jen, right, wouldn't you say that that's?
That's my understanding, is that they weren't able to see it until they started the work.
That makes sense.
It's a valid question though, because even though, granted, you know, but you're starting to approach 1 mil on 20 mil, it's still 5%. It's a chunk.
Which, well, in a project this size, I think they advised us of, what, up to 10?
And, yes.
Yeah,
So
not 10 million,
halfway
up to
there.
10%.
Right, I got you.
Yeah. So in the grand scheme, we're still good, but I guess
It's
I
a
don't-
surprising piece of,
yeah,
but not to be unexpected in a building that has some age that.
right. And it's not the only, I mean, there's the first one on here, pier number 50 is add pipe hangers per
Yeah.
state code review. Well,
Yeah, I
the
understand.
pipe hangers were up to state code review, but as soon as you start any construction project, and if you mess with anything, they're gonna come in and say, oh, now that whole thing isn't up to code.
Right.
And you have no choice, and that's a significant number as well.
Yep.
But that one I question less,
Right.
simply because I'm betting it's hidden.
Right.
Okay.
Anything you wanna add? Yeah.
No, not right now.
Been holding back for it.
I guess I move that we move these, and, I mean, part of that process is and I don't remember which one is it the number 9 one that is the,
Number 9 is the multiples.
right,
Yeah.
but was originally the question one in order, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so,
Yeah, and I have no further questions, it was just,
no, let's,
So as we look at the order of agenda that we're experimenting with here, obviously you want to hear about these because they're both
Right.
significant.
Right.
Even though there is some, you know, add and subtract, they're still both significant, especially that claim that was something that you
Right.
obviously have talked about before in some fashion. So I can sign off on these because there's no exception taken by the board, or they can, each month, when we get a change order, we can make them action items. It's procedurally, it's whatever you want to. Either way, you know, they should be
I think we.
presented.
I think we talked about this at
Mhm.
one of our previous meetings, that we would like to see and hear about these
right,
Yes. we do.
because we want transparency to our community and our taxpayers as we spend their very generous
Yes,
bond approval.
absolutely.
All right, so then we would be moving this to an action item. I mean,
I don't know if
I
I'm
mean,
hearing that.
Scott wants us to talk about it, but are we okay with him signing off on it as long as we discuss it? Or do we want it as an action item where we have to approve it?
I think what you're saying, Scott, is as we move forward, any additionals,
You want to
we,
continue on these
we want to
projects.
continue to have that
Mhm.
notification and the ability to have a discussion.
Right, I like what we're doing tonight. Bring it
Okay.
up,
And the,
let's review
All
it,
right.
let's talk about it,
the
let's,
nice thing now about board book is if somebody wants to see all 55 pages of that change order, it's there for them.
Just in
Right,
so-
case. One of them is 70 pages, so,
Okay.
you know, light reading. Okay.
Bob's keeping you like.
the project manager in me just loves it.
It has been.
I
the
read
last
math
2
books
weeks.
when I have insomnia.
Exhausted.
It helps. Put you to sleep. All right.
So we're moving forward
Yep.
with approval of, or
Yes.
we're giving,
That's what we're
The-
doing.
No
Yeah.
exception.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Make no
Thumbs
exception.
up.
so I think if we follow that process going forward, we're good.
Agreed. I
Yeah.
like it.
Board takes no exception to the change orders.
All right. So the next up is just a student enrollment snapshot.
So we agreed to just make it a part of the agenda every month that you would see what our enrollment is as that snapshot. And the first document is just the Mars data run in time for this meeting. And the second one is we're beginning to experiment with, would the board like to see comparisons of key terms? So we're just throwing some things out there. It's like this month, this year to this month last year. first day and last day enrollment, and things like that. So over time, you can say, I'd really like to see this compared to this, and we can build those snapshots, because otherwise you're just looking at literally how many kids we have, but that doesn't tell you what's happening in a grade level or what's our trends or whatever, and we can always compare that next level of stuff, so just give us feedback on that.
Yeah, that was my comment, is I don't know what to do with this data. I find it interesting because it's data. But I don't know if we should be doing trend analysis or if we should be.
We should be following it to a certain point, I think that, but I did, while I was not at the last meeting, I did get
The Dropbox stuff?
the Dropbox stuff with the graph in for, was it 10 years, the one you presented?
Yeah, the one we put to community partners.
Yes.
Or as community partners.
Right,
Yeah.
and I think that that's a valid piece to remind everybody where we're at, and this is no surprise.
Right.
Yeah, that meant something to me because it showed a
It
Yeah.
did,
trend.
it did.
And
This
we'll be
is harder
talking
for
about
me
that
to
next,
understand.
too.
Yeah, no, this is like,
Right.
okay, this is sort of interesting.
Can you tell me what it mean, as I'm looking at this, I'm seeing in parentheses,
The
I'm
first
seeing
one?
like SAC 01, comma, like for instance, I'm looking at the item under other counts, it says students attending public schools elsewhere. And then in parents, it says SAC 01, comma, 11, comma, 08. And, sorry, let me scroll up here, the document I'm looking at is called February 2020 enrollment. So down towards the bottom, it's like the fourth, it's like the fifth one down. So what does that mean? What is
Dave
SAC?
just left, so Mike, Jen, or anybody know what, is that a site probably in special education?
The different like state coding categories. So this is something more detailed that's sent out to administrators each month.
So the tuition agreement means that a student is receiving special services provided by a different district or a different intermediate district, and they send us the bill, we pay 90% of that. So that's why open enrollment out is detrimental, because you will pay 90% of the cost to somebody else to provide the service to a kid that's living in your school district.
Right, right, and that's,
I just don't know SAC specifically what that refers to.
yeah.
The acronym is school age care.
I know,
School
school
age
age
care,
care is
right.
what I want to
So
say,
it's
but that doesn't
tuition-
make sense to me.
it's tuition.
Yeah,
In this context, it's not school age.
I know.
Okay.
It doesn't work.
It is in
I know
some.
students something
Yeah.
else.
I mean, what's interesting to me on this page is the withdrawals box and the new enrollments box. I think that's,
Yep.
like
I agree.
that's like a things that change. That's what I would think is interesting to look at.
I like looking at the demographics.
Yeah, I just don't
Yeah, but
expect
they're
to
all
see
just
a lot
these
of change in the
snapshots. I just don't
demographics
know.
quickly.
I don't know what to do with that. I can look at the other piece and go,
I do quick math and do percentages to just see how, where we're at.
Yeah.
yeah, but if you look at it every month,
Okay.
No, I can't do
it's
every
still
year.
fun. I mean, yeah, because that's, I don't feel like this is, I'm not sure this is something I need to see every month, quite honestly.
No, I'd be more like year
Thanks
over
for
year
coming.
for that. For that
Go
particular piece.
Falcons.
Good night. But trends and awareness of where kids are going in general, I think is interesting.
Mhm.
The
So-
10-year analysis every so often, I think that's interesting. A little forecasting number.
So, so kind of where we started with the discussion on this was, I hearken back to my first year on the board, where we looked at that item that says students attending public schools elsewhere. And we, as a board, sat down and we called every single one of those families to say, can you help us understand why you're going elsewhere? And that's where we came back with, the majority of the time, it's simple logistics. Weren't we saying that we were gonna see something on here that would tell us month to month? Like, hey, from January to February, 2 students left the district, and
Right.
that was going to be our action item to follow up with them, to call those 2 families and say,
Is there a particular
yeah,
reason
yeah,
why?
is there a reason? Did you move because mom got a new job somewhere? Did you
Right.
move
No, we
because,
talked about it.
whatever? And
We did discuss it.
maybe I'm not seeing that number on here.
The data's on there, but the contact information's not. So Scott, like right in this box right here is all the withdrawals.
Okay, and that's just this month?
Yeah, correct.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, so
But
that's not,
we
that's
do
not in
also
summary?
have 21 new enrollments this month. So we did lose students, but we also gained
I had no idea we
students.
had that many,
We
we had
lost
21 new
27
enrollments
students.
this month.
26, excuse me,
Yeah,
one
we
minute.
had
But
21.
I think
26
that
out?
the header needs to be withdrawals and then the month
Yeah.
or whatever.
Wow.
But then, I mean, 26, I'm not counting the one student who graduated.
Yeah.
So we had
Yes.
21 new enrollments,
Anybody
but we
else
had
surprised by that
21
number?
or
That's
26
big.
students withdrawn.
26 out.
That's net minus 5.
So
Yeah.
And
we-
to do so in the middle of the year, I mean, to transfer other or transferred to a non-public, to do these things in the middle of a school year is good.
Right.
I mean, I understand.
February.
Physical
Yeah.
moves make
Yeah,
sense.
I understand,
but
hey,
those
you move when you move,
other-
but
Right,
Are concerning.
yep. And I have heard from at least one person who is one of the transferred other. And so there is some discussions we can have about that. And I think some of that will come up next month as we talk about mental health and supports for students and
so
things like that.
so what do we as a board want to do with this information?
So one thing that I shared from an earlier discussion at the board level with the site leaders was that the board may want to at some point contact families that are moving out, and that what we may ask the site leader who knows the story of the kids coming out best is to winnow it down to, yeah, this parent got a job in this town and they got up and left, and take that off the list, 'cause, you know, and to find out, this person was upset about
Right,
a special education decision or something,
Right.
and they told us, we had one this week where it was, I'm upset about something, I'm homeschooling my child.
yep,
Okay, so that would be one that maybe that you would get, to decide if you wanted to call them. So we would task the site leaders to take their mobility list for the month and then pull out the ones that actually make sense to call, so that you're not making calls that are,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But, and you could call the people who moved because they got a job 2 counties away, you can call them, but at least you know the
Right.
story behind those students for that month.
But part of this, when it's put together, I think that whoever it is, if, you know, in which building, and they realize that, oh, this family they're leaving, you know, somebody who's leaving from high school, somebody's leaving from grade school, and they are moving because the parent has moved the family or something. We just have some kind of note to that. I mean, I don't think we want to get away
No,
from.
not in here, but if you want to get a call list,
Oh,
Right.
that,
we would
yes.
get the numbers, the contact, and everything,
But
and they
whittle
would
that
sort it
down.
down to tell you,
Right,
give you more information about whether you actually want to call them or
I
not.
think that's important.
yeah.
yes.
And I think in my mind, when I look at this list, I see 16 students, I'm not sure how many families that would equate to, that I would want to know why they chose to pull their child or children from the schools. Mike.
The question is, do we already know some of that?
Yeah,
We do have students that go to care and treatment. And so if the care and treatment is in another school district, they're
yeah.
not enrolled here, and they receive educational services, say, for example, up in St. Paul. And then when they come back, at least to the high school, then they re-enroll back at Hastings High School. We think of them as ours in the same, but from a funding standpoint, they have to unenroll and then re-enroll.
So Mike, would that be,
So we would
would that
want
be on
to-
moved outside the district on here then? Does that come up as moved outside the district as we roll this up then?
or transferred
transfer.
Or
other.
transfer?
The transfer.
I think it's transferred.
Okay.
It's
Well,
transferred.
So to winnow it down to what we would want to do,
Right.
I would say we would want to set situations like that aside.
Of course.
Okay. We'd want to set aside situations where we know, hey, the family moved or whatever, although I could be convinced that there may be some value in calling them just as kind of an exit
I don't think
interview.
that's a bad idea, because I know some families that have moved because of something that happened here. That's why
Well,
they
no,
moved.
yeah,
So-
sure. But on the flip side, on the new enrollments, and there might be some of those that are coming back from a facility or whatever the case may be, so again, take those out. Wouldn't it be nice to receive a call from a school board member saying,
Yep.
welcome, we're so glad you're here.
Yeah.
Yep.
2-minute call, 2-minute call.
I can get behind that.
That one I
Absolutely.
can get behind, like welcoming new families that are
Yep.
maybe not even new kindergartners, but just moving into the district.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're getting that welcome from their site lead already,
Right.
but I'm not completely comfortable, and maybe it's because I don't understand exactly what calls would be to withdrawals. I think it's important for us to understand in a cumulative sense. The withdrawals are off-cycle graduations, they're
Well,
some
but that's
amount is
separate
eight.
on
I mean,
here.
we know, I know, but that's the one I don't feel like I'm not sure I feel like calling those people because I suspect
Right.
we already know why
No,
they're
no,
going.
and I
But
think
for the unknown
for
ones,
folks, for
Mhm.
folks where we know for a fact, hey, their child graduated early. Their child, you know,
I'm gonna guess in many, many cases and I could be wrong. I guess if we're gonna start doing that, I would wanna know which ones do we really not know.
Yeah,
right,
right,
Not, because I think in many cases our principals are gonna know.
right.
Right.
The support staff are gonna know.
right.
And
Yeah.
if they know the child had a special ed decision that the family didn't support, I don't
We don't
know
need,
if it helps us to call.
I don't wanna rehash that,
You know.
because to
Right.
me, that would kind of be
That'd be
undercutting our
aggravating.
leaders,
Yeah.
and I don't wanna do that.
It's the ones that are unknown.
And that's a number that's important to me.
Right.
Is the
Right.
how many is that?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
this doesn't give us that yet.
and even for the ones that are known, I would like, we don't have to
Broad
make phone
categories.
calls for these, but some categories, are they leaving because we didn't offer courses that they wanted? Are they leaving because of bullying? Are they leaving, what is kind of the overall trend, and are we seeing a pattern in any of
something,
that?
yeah.
Right.
Right.
But I love the idea of calling people as they,
And it's
As
kind of
they
a fine,
join,
it's kind of a
yeah.
fine line, because there are personal things that happen in people's lives that
right.
we need to be a little careful about nosing into, but.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think that the administrators probably know in a lot of cases what that is, and maybe it's just that we also kind of get an understanding of what that is.
Right,
Yeah,
so
at
if
a
we take,
categorical
if
level.
we, if we take these numbers and run them through our administrators to produce it, boy, we really don't have a good idea why this family is no longer with us. That would be helpful.
Mhm.
And on the flip side, to again, reduce the list of incoming, and I don't think we've talked about this before, but I don't know, it seems like a nice idea. To reduce that number of new enrollments to, okay, this person is coming back or whatever. These are truly new enrollments in the district. And I know they've been welcomed by the site, but to receive a member, I don't know, I guess when I would think that'd be kind of a nice thing.
Yeah, I think so too.
So the site leaders have a heads up that you might be asking for something like that in the future, but they weren't given any directions to follow through on that. So if there's something that you want now or in the future, define it and we'll get it to them to actually target a month or whatever you would like.
I guess first off, the simple part is the form needs to indicate, like here, it doesn't indicate that it was for said month. So that is just a housekeeping thing to say, okay, when it talks about new enrollments, there were 21 in this month, and the withdrawals were 26, whatever it says there. So that we know that we're talking about February or January or.
Yeah. I suspect this is in here because it's sort of an easy to get table. Maybe I'm wrong. But that what would be interesting to me is new enrollments, then categorical reasons for withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
And then outside of this, maybe we identify 3 periods, October, January, and March, where we divvy out the new
Dig into it.
people, and we just call them. And then the withdrawals, we just can start watching trend-wise. We can
Mhm.
start watching, and then we could say, wow, we have this relatively big group that's leaving for reasons we don't know. Those we would follow up on. But first, I'd like to see a trend evaluation, or at least a categorical understanding of why people are going.
Yeah.
Which means just a whole new form. I mean, to asking people, develop some big categories and then
Mhm.
ask site leadership to report on
So-
those categories.
So do we want to say, through all this discussion, we just want administration to tweak the form as we've discussed a little bit and come back next month and we'll see.
Yeah.
Does it fit into what we've talked about tonight?
Yeah, I'd be interested in getting that. I think it ends up being something we don't have to look at every month, but that we look at a couple times a year.
Right, but as we're trying to come up with what we want that form to look like, I think talking about it more frequently so that they can kind of get an idea of what we're
Mhm.
looking for.
That would be my
Okay.
opinion.
Okay. All right, so school board committee reports. The first one is the Community Partners Committee, and so we do have an update there.
Yeah, I submitted a little quick summary. Jeff and I had an opportunity to go speak at the City Council of Hastings, where for the first time that I can recall in my now 9 years on the board, thinking about 9 years on the board, the city looked at annexing some property for development in low density housing, as well as moving forward on the tax increment financing for the affordable senior housing immediately behind Schoolhouse Square. And we just spoke, not specific to those two topics, or in a proposal to support those two ideas, but just the idea that engagement in new housing is important. And we provided the 10-year enrollment graph, which just shows what's happening. Thank you to Jen Subert for pulling that together. And it was interesting. It's hard to know what impact it has to go to those meetings, but after, we presented with a handful of other Chamber of Commerce and an adjacent aggregate company and stuff, but we heard schools brought up numerous times by the city council members.
After
And
your
their responses.
discussion, I got phone calls from 2 council folks that said they really appreciated getting the graph and seeing
Good.
how that had played out, and they were unaware of
I feel
where.
like all we talk about is that, so it's interesting to hear.
Mhm.
That's good. I got a very nice email response from one of the city council people just thanking us for taking the time. So, and I, that kind of comes out of our community partnership with the city, Alina Hospital, and Chamber of Commerce. And I talked with Christy afterwards and said, if we hear about development or new housing in any of the townships or any of our other cities in our district, we'd be more than happy to go and share the
Right.
same information, because, we support that. You have to reload your meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Lisa, what did they have to say about the enrollment graph?
They didn't have really specific things to say. They just took it as a entry for record. Both of the items that they considered, they supported unanimously.
So they didn't express surprise or?
Not at the time, no. They just took it and handed it down and said,
Yeah, it seemed like it was part of the overall discussion, and then once it moved past those general items and got more direct with the developer and the property owner, that kind of cleared the air quite a bit, and
yeah.
then it moved forward rather rapidly. And I would like to thank that, I think you two well represented the board at the city council meeting.
Yep. That was very quick notice, so thank you for being able to get there. I mean, we got asked for
No,
enrollment
that was on
numbers the
agenda
morning
till
of,
that
so,
morning.
yep.
I don't have anything going on.
All right. So the next is the Self-Funded Insurance Committee.
Yeah, so we provide a short little summary too that I'll leave for everybody to read about the current status of both the medical and the dental plans. We are getting claims substantively higher, double digits higher than they've been in the past. It's just a statement of fact. We got a very good response to a request for first bids, and so it's like best and final. Is that the name of the next submission? So then our consultant goes back in coordination with the submitters and encourages them to brush and polish and tighten up their bid based on competitors. So we'll get best and final Friday morning, and then we meet next week, and I think we'll have a real serious conversation about if we'll see a rate increase and when.
So action would be at the March board meeting?
Yes.
Jen
Yeah.
is nodding.
Yeah.
That's why I couldn't quite see
Yeah.
over.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
committee
Jen's
will,
not.
Shoulder, yeah,
the
so
committee
we'll
will
meet-
bring forth
The committee will bring forth a recommendation,
Okay.
Okay.
and we're meeting very early in the month, so
All right.
Just
next-
one item to note on the medical, you'll see bullet 2 is the total plan year to date, or total year plan to date claims are up 16% from the previous plan year at this time. The other important note there is that that is not a one-year trend, because the previous year, they were up 14% from the previous year. So over a 2-year span, we've got a roughly 30%
Growth in claims.
increase in claims.
Okay.
So some of the 7 to 9% industry trend,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we were running below that for a while.
catching up.
This may be a normalization, you know.
Okay. All right, so the facility committee, really, this has already been covered in everything else. It's all been brought up. So this is talking about the proposal from Wold, and mainly the main discussion around the facilities committee was if we were to move the preschool to the high school. I don't know why it keeps.
Yeah.
Does-
It's
Sorry,
kick-
it
it's-
keeps
we're
refreshing.
into the.
No, it's doing
yeah,
it-
we're into the
It's
document,
Yes, and it
keeps
keeps
kicking
clicking
us
it off.
back.
Yep, me too, for some reason.
Back to the agenda.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not alone.
No,
Okay.
I just see Stephanie flinch every time mine disappears, and I'm like,
Stop flinching.
Get
You're
out.
doing
you
it.
sit still.
No
and
more
then I'm
flinching.
like, oh, it's weird. Okay.
So it was really talking about what that proposal would look like, such as that we would be unable to put sinks in each preschool classroom if we were to do that, and instead we would create a new sink area in the common space, the cost of card readers at the C-Pod in order for added security there, changing the bathroom that's already right outside the C-Pod so that it would be accessible just to the preschool class, and that this would end up being gender neutral so that both genders of students in the preschool would be able to use this bathroom. And again, and the total cost of that would be $195,000. But of that, $95,000 was already a consideration for the high school. So then we also talked about the long-term planning and discussion, such as what are our needs for special ed, where are we at with future enrollments, what would our future needs be, how often do we want to check in on this. So that was kind of the big things, and we've talked about those quite a bit, and we'll bring them up as we talk about the preschool location in the action items. So. All right, and then we have the policy committee, and so this is kind of a template for what we can follow in the future for the committee reports. Coming up with the policy committee's mission, so for each committee to have a mission so that we know what our purpose is as we go to these committees, what our goals are.
And I would just add that this is a draft. Kelsey and I looked at other school districts that kind of had exemplars out there, and especially new committees or committees that it may not be obvious what they do. It's really important so they have a mission, so people don't meet and do things that take a lot of time and don't really move us any further along. So I put this together as an example. The committee did not adopt this mission. I just drafted it after the meeting as a starter. So I just wanted to make it clear that I'm not putting words in their mouth. It's just a sample mission, but it does reflect what they talked about. And then I just made a report that follows along. So that could be a model that you use where you have the mission on your report, and then you just type in your report and your summary in after that. But to be talked about whenever you want to talk about it.
Looks good to me.
Okay. All right, and then to go back with the agenda change and board book and such, we did miss, it's added now?
Yeah, that's why you guys.
Oh, okay, here we go, sorry. To go back and talk about COVID-19, because that was added as a discussion item. So, what is our plan?
So on my way home today, right before I rolled into this meeting, was the On NPR, they had the president talking and the CDC talking, and the recommendation that came from the head of the CDC was that even though this is not a pandemic at this time, they advise government agencies, universities, schools, etc. They said now is the time to be making your plan. What if this comes to fruition? What if, and there's so many what ifs. What if they advise no travel, outside of your home? And hopefully it doesn't come to this, but that's why we have a plan. And I don't know, in my time on the board, I've never heard of a plan for the district in case of something of this magnitude.
Yeah,
I mean,
catastrophic event.
Yeah, I went out and I looked and I didn't see anything out there, so it's,
Is there something that health services has that,
they said that, and I'm thinking.
I mean, our health service,
I'm thinking the first two logical stops would be, they said there's information on the CDC website. I haven't been there, I have no idea what's there. The other logical stop would be MSBA. To say, okay, and they may not have anything either, they may just be developing, but given that we have the capability for e-learning and things such as that, yeah, it just, what does it look like if they make a recommendation that we don't have large gatherings? Okay, well, I mean, think about some of the, various sporting events, various show choir. What if they recommend no travel and show choir needs to go to, or is scheduled to go to, wherever? What does that look like? What does it look like for some of our overseas trips that I know that we have planned or
Yeah.
forthcoming? What does that look like from a district perspective? Is it something that we stand, how do we make the decision on, yeah, you should go, no, you shouldn't go, without it being a onesie, twosie, gut feel type of thing. It's like, I just feel like we need to be thinking about this now before,
Right.
hopefully it won't come to this, but before we're in, a situation that we're not prepared for.
At my work, we have updates on our website daily from the CDC. That's how we at the hospital are working daily with it, so I think we definitely go by the CDC recommendations and just follow very closely and discuss it frequently. And have to call a special meeting, I think, if something changes it. It's
Right.
already in California, so.
Right. Yeah,
More-
I saw San Francisco already
Yeah.
declared a state of
it's
emergency.
So then if it starts, there was a case in Wisconsin, so,
Right.
it's here, so.
but do
And
we,
it's-
do we direct, who do we ask to pull this all together for us and make a presentation is, I guess, what I'm really asking. Who do we ask?
It's a good timely
Besides-
discussion because,
Not pointing it back.
as we've been working at,
Right.
coming up with, trying to get out in front of the return of the high school nurse, and we got multiple questions from people. Maybe we would've got many, many more if we hadn't communicated first. And the responses that we gave to people made sense to them. They had questions, but the responses so far have been understood by people who've checked in with us. That led to, the discussion of this is changing daily on this COVID-19. But at about 2 o'clock today, after we kind of got through all the responses on Carrie Cotton coming back to the high school, our district nurse, Mary Ellen Fox, had sent me an item which was a sample from her previous district about responding to something like this. She said, this is a good example. By 4 o'clock, she was here waiting for me to come back from the high school. And she said, and she was showing to me, this is what's in our crisis plan, because we already have a plan for how to deal with the flu and other things similar, because that can happen. I think it was just a few months ago that the Shakopee schools closed down because of a flu outbreak. So this isn't that different than that.
it creates a different hysteria, in the media and in communication and everything, because it's got the flash to it. But the example she gave me, I think at 2, was actually a SARS virus reaction plan that a district had put together. So similar, it's like, it's this strain of flu A, which is the one that has had a surge in this school district, our actual nurse counts this year. That can, any of those strains could break out. Plus, it could be SARS, it could be coronavirus, it could be any of these things. So there's a template there. So what I'm hearing is, because I got it at 4 o'clock, I haven't even read through it yet, is look at what we have in our crisis plan for something like this, and then consider what might need to be specific to, because the flu can close down all our events, just as any strain of the flu or some other pathogen communicable disease could close down all our events based on the guidelines that we're getting. So what I can do is, after I read it, I can forward it out to you and say, this is what we currently have, and throw your ideas about what you'd like to see customized. I know the Shakopee superintendent very well. I could say, okay, I'm sure you put together a plan after the fact of, first you reacted, then you tried to get some kind of documentation. Share it with us. How did you close down the schools? Did you close down all sports? Did you close down theater, trips? Based on you having to close down the school, that'd be a great, let somebody do the groundwork for us, and then adapt from that and react to the new news that comes. So that's what I was thinking at 4:30 today.
I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So that's a recommendation.
We can
So,
work
Okay,
on
that's
that.
a recommendation, that the superintendent follows through, evaluates, gives us some best practices and some understanding moving forward, and balancing out what we already have in critical criteria for the
It's in our
flu
crisis plan.
here, for our crisis plan, and see what we have to adopt, if anything, and provide that to the board, and we can discuss that at the work session moving forward.
Sounds clear enough.
Okay.
Could we reach out to NSBA
Yeah,
on this one, just
Do
to see
that
if maybe
additionally.
they have something?
Well, they don't have anything, but they might be working on something
Right.
right now.
right.
Well, that's my guess. I'm betting we're not the first district to talk about this.
Okay.
Good stuff. Thank you.
All right, so we're moving on to action items, and first up is the consent agenda, which includes change orders, bills payable, and personnel report. And now the change orders are not the large change orders that we had just been seeing. Well,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah, they are.
and
We weren't sure,
others,
we weren't
though.
sure how you wanted to
Correct.
handle them, so basically,
Okay.
when you consent to the change orders, you're consenting to 9 and 10.
Okay.
Just like you did. I think that would be the nice record that nobody, if you approve the consent agenda, you're approving change orders 9 and 10, or that were presented, or in a future meeting, whatever change orders were presented and discussed.
Okay. All right, and so then as you can see, it has the change orders, also the non-public transportation reimbursement for family whose children attend non-public schools, bills payable, and the personnel report. And then on board book, you can also click all of the different attachments so that you can read all of that as well.
And the bond update is a part of the finance report. Because we're building this thing, it got lumped into the title bills payable. We can retitle that, but essentially, it's a normal thing for Jen to put a finance report together for you. So if we want to detach things, relabel them, now is the time to talk about that, because like I said, we're literally picking titles and things for these based on what makes sense, but it
Yeah,
evolves.
I would like to see that bond work letter, that page, that almost be up like with the enrollment report. So there's not an action required on that, we have to pay the bills. So pull it out of the bills payable, just have a separate one-page document that Jen's done a very nice job of saying, this is the status of our bond work.
And you want that in with the enrollment piece?
I think it's up in the same place as the enrollment piece. It's not a consent agenda item to me, it's a
It's a report.
administrative report.
Okay, administrative report, I'll go with that.
Yeah, it goes in that, I think it
Okay.
goes in that part of the agenda, and then we call it out for what it is, because that's a really big action that's separable in my mind from those.
Okay. And we had talked about that after superintendent, it's the administrator of the day, whoever might be scheduled to come in and present. And in this case, we could just make it a regular finance, director of finance report right in that spot.
Okay.
And the bills would be separate because that does need to be part
Yeah,
of the
that
consent
needs,
agenda.
there needs action, it's,
Then I move to approve the consent agenda.
I have some, we need to clean up the consent agenda, because we have like, right now we have the high school parking lot in there. So that's gotta be
No,
pulled
it's
out.
No, it's not in there.
Hastings High, how's that separate?
So this is,
It's still under 7,
this is A2.
so the consent agenda is only A.
Mhm.
It's not 7.
Yes.
Yep.
I made the same exact mistake, Lisa, don't feel bad.
Yeah, geez,
So-
I figured everything in section 7 was consent agenda.
More will come with practice, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know when you asked that, I was like, did I read
Yeah,
the agenda wrong? And
And I followed
Yeah.
up
You read it the
today.
other way.
Yeah, because I asked via email, I'm like, okay, and I was,
Yeah.
I had
All right, why don't
completely
you-
missed
now
that
ignore my
indent,
personal notes about pull this out of consent agenda, because I want to talk about it.
Yep.
okay. All right, so then we have a motion on the floor to approve the consent agenda. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, motion carries. So next up is the APAC roster and concurrence resolution.
So the two documents in there, in order for us to comply with our American Indian Parent Advisory Committee plan, we need to have an annual vote of compliance with the plan by the committee, and we also have to accept the roster of members. And Jen Reichel is here, and she also attached the actual plan in case people want to refer to if they're voting for concurrence or non-concurrence, what's the plan they're voting for. So it is in the form of a resolution, and so in order to submit it, the board makes the resolution that they're accepting the vote of concurrence, and in this case, it was a vote of concurrence. And we'll invite Jen to share any more background or anything else, or answer questions if you have any about that.
What questions do you
Yeah.
have? I'm happy to talk about the small but mighty parent group that we have.
None.
Are the goals that we have for our Native American students in line with the goals that we have for our non-Native American students?
Yes. So the Indian Ed program plan is expected to align with our World's Best Workforce plan. Certainly the goals can be tweaked so that they live under the umbrella of the district's plan, focusing specifically on Native students. But we wrote it with as much alignment to our World's Best Workforce as possible. And then if you take a look at those strategies, the bullet points under them are how we're allocating funds. Because with our Native families, there's funding attached. And the strategies really do come right from the mouths of the parents on that committee. And they are advocating for these are the things that will best serve our students. So when it comes time for that vote of concurrence or non-concurrence, we offer a vote of concurrence suggests that we are making a good faith effort to serve your students and follow the plan that you've helped us create. Or a vote of non-concurrence is, nope, there's some significant work that needs to be done, and with a vote of non-concurrence, then there's some additional paperwork that needs to be done. There are some districts who, just by virtue of their urban location, who have access to pretty significant media, who will vote non-concurrence in order to heighten their level of concern and have people recognize that Native peoples need more things. And so, because our district doesn't have Care 11 hanging out or, others, they didn't feel like it was necessary to have that platform.
I especially like goal 4 and goal 5. especially for when we say that we're going to we have 100% of our Native American students in grades 10 through 12 attend at least one college visit.
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh, I like that.
I saw that.
And this year, that has already happened. Gabe organized in the fall a visit to the U of M specifically on a day where they invited Native students from across the state.
Oh, that's
Oh, very
fantastic.
cool.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Okay. That's great.
So the formality, if we're going to follow the proper procedure, is to introduce the resolution, to read in the resolution, which is on page 3. So it's the whereas and the therefore be resolved, followed by a roll call vote, and then the resolution is that the board is acknowledging that our parent advisory committee voted in concurrence with the plan, and then we can submit it.
I'll make that motion to follow in concurrence, whatever the correct verbiage was.
Introduce the resolution.
Introduce the resolution, as stated.
I'll second.
Okay. And then maybe the clerk reads it in.
Are we doing roll call then?
It needs a roll call vote.
Okay. Voting in favor of the resolution, Becky Beisel?
Yes.
Wait,
Or we
okay.
have to read
I think we need to read it first.
Read it, or put,
Oh,
if you
okay.
want to put it
I
up
have
and
it
say
up.
it's up there.
I have it up there.
and
It's
everybody
right
read it
up there.
themselves.
Or can we waive
Or
the
you
reading?
can read it, everybody can
It's
read
whatever
it.
you-
I just read it.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
Can
a
we,
resolution.
can we have a motion to waive the reading? Oh. Okay, it's up
It's
here.
right there.
So,
Mhm.
the motion is up here, or the resolution is up on the screen, and
Be
you're
read.
welcome to read it.
Yep.
And then we can have a roll call. And we can do a roll call.
We're ready
Yep.
for roll call.
We can do a roll call.
You jumped on the last time you tried.
Voting in favor of the resolution, Becky Beisel?
Yes.
Brian Davis?
Yes.
Dave Pemble?
Yes.
Kelsey Waits?
Yes.
Lisa Hedin?
Yes.
Scott Gergen?
Yes.
Stephanie Mullen? Yes.
Okay. Then there we go. All right.
And in addition to a photo at the end, you'll have some signatures that you need to get to, right? So this would be one where we get
Okay.
signatures on it, and so we can submit it because it's on the timeline.
All right, so next up is the Hastings High School Licensed School Counselor position that we discussed in our discussion items. So do we have a motion?
So move.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
I just wanted to enter it in for the discussion purposes, it's for a fixed term. The
Mhm.
person will be non-renewed. And then we'll account for next year's staffing.
We just lost our projector.
Timed
We
out or
did.
what?
I don't know how to fix that, so,
There we go.
okay.
Becky knows how to fix it.
Sure you do. Look,
All right,
great job.
yeah. That's not my screen anymore, though, but that's okay.
No, it's displaying for you.
Yeah,
You're fine. It'll be fine.
all right. So, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, next up is the custodian group master agreement.
So there's 2 Teamsters agreements, and they were tentatively agreed upon. We talked about it at the last meeting, but we didn't have, because we were working through Dropbox and stuff, we didn't give you the copies of the agreement, so we just agreed that, to let you know that they were both tentatively settled. The only change would be the update on health insurance once that's acted on by the board. And so we agreed to put them on this month, so they'd be an action item that would be posted as an upcoming action item. So there they are, both of them ready for you to consider approval.
Okay. So I'll just pull it up because that's cool that I can do that. Oh, well, it's not working anyway. All right, so do we have a motion to approve the contract?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, Community Education Paraprofessionals Group Master Agreement.
Second Teamsters group.
Okay.
Move for approval?
Second.
All right, is there any discussion?
I don't understand what this is. I'm not seeing a attachment
The
here.
attachment's in the
The
previous
attachment's in the
agenda.
previous one.
Okay.
The one
The
ahead of it
second.
had two.
The second
Yeah.
one in that previous one.
No, I thought they were both lumped into, so the ComEd para final contract.
Yes, that first one,
is that
first attachment.
Okay,
Yep.
very good,
Yeah.
thank you,
Yeah.
I understand now.
Okay. So is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, the Hastings High School Activities Parking Lot is technically an action item, and we can,
Move that we
can we-
table
we
this
can
action item.
choose to table that.
Second.
So, I just want to clarify, if you look at the superintendent memo, which we printed out separately for you so you wouldn't get caught flipping back and forth, because there is a bid timeline, that's why, preparing for this meeting, I made a recommendation. And based on being in that meeting and asking the questions, and Cam and Jen were there, I'm making the recommendation that you select option number 1 to put in the full-size gravel parking lot. You can take it from there, but in preparation for this meeting and knowing that there was a timeline where if they're going to bid it, they have to have it. And you're gonna flip back to that date, but they need it before your next meeting.
They're gonna issue it on the 16th.
I appreciate the recommendation. I would say that we need more information before we can move forward with this. I don't want to approve something and move forward with something that we haven't completely thought through.
Yep,
And-
as long
and-
as we understand that means that we may not get the parking lot.
We may not
this
get the
year.
parking lot. I understand that we may not get the parking lot in the timeline that we want. I also understand that the pricing of it could change.
Yep.
So with those two considerations, I still, that is
You
my thought.
understand that?
So we need a
in-
motion to
motion
approve
Yep.
and vote on it, or we need a motion
I
to
too
table
understand that
definitely
it's seconding
and
the
vote on it.
motion. I would like
Okay.
us to
Vote
get
definitely.
the facilities committee together as soon as
Okay.
possible, and even if that's like a conference call with Walt.
Okay.
Trent should be there too.
Yeah, and Trent should be there, and just sort of get some of these questions
That's
answered.
definitely part of this table.
Maybe there's an opportunity to bring it in
Set the
March and
date.
push it a little bit.
Okay.
Bring it
we
to
had
our
it
working group,
Table at a
our
future,
working group.
Potentially,
meeting.
So
we
then,
may or
the-
may not be
Where you
ready
vote.
to at that time.
yeah,
That's
so then
part
does
of
the
it.
motion change? If we are directing our facilities committee to act on something, that feels different than,
I'm not saying we
Tabling it.
act on it, I'm saying that the
I'm-
facilities committee has a meeting and
Right,
gathers
I'm saying
information
your motion-
to make a recommendation.
my motion was to table it.
Yep, so we,
And I'm not sure that that is appropriate if we are going to be referring it and asking our facilities committee
Okay,
to
that's what I was
do
waiting for you to
something now. I don't know if there's a difference there, and I just don't want to get myself
Right.
in Dutch.
Yeah,
I
I
guess-
hear what you're saying.
so at this point, we can make a motion to approve it or a motion to table definitely, so that it would come up at a future meeting.
When you
You
table,
seconded, right?
Wait, here.
okay, so when you table it
Superintendent.
definitely, you're putting it on the table. At any point in the future, someone can make a motion to remove it from the table and
Put it in.
put it back on the
So
agenda.
then it sounds like that is appropriate. So,
You just
I
have to
stand by
remember,
my motion.
take it off
I stand by my
in
second.
the future.
Okay, so is there any discussion? Right, all those in favor to table the motion definitely?
aye.
Aye.
Oppose, same sign? All right, motion carries. All right, so next up is the temporary all-day preschool location.
All right, so we don't have any, when you open up that document, I don't know if you're gonna open it, you're gonna up.
Is
Okay.
it letting me back up there?
Okay, so the documents up there are the same ones that you saw before in the discussion about the possibility of temporarily relocating all-day preschool. The only new thing is the last thing, which is the quote from Wald. And so the recommendation that I made based on hearing about this for the first time in January, going through all the discussion, and looking at the fact that if the board does not make a decision on this, they've made a decision. They've made a decision that they're going to create a waiting list for all-day preschool, which is a valid option, but there's no action that we can take or not take that doesn't have
Right.
some impact. So with that in mind, I've made the recommendation to, for a motion to approve the temporary location of the all-day preschool programming to the C1 pod of Hastings High School to include utilizing residual facility improvement bond proceeds from the 2018A bonds to add a secure lower entrance, card reader on door number 21, gender-neutral restroom remodeling, and the hand washing facilities as quoted in that Wool bid.
And so at this point, we can have a motion and then we can have discussion on it. Trying to figure out which one of these to click. Sorry for everyone who's going back and forth with my clicking. Well,
So
I just
we
wanted
have
to
have
see
the
the,
motion before we can discuss it?
Otherwise, there's nothing to discuss.
yeah. I mean, if the motion's not there, we don't have something to discuss, so.
Becky moved.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, so is there any discussion?
Yeah, I have a few things. One, with the point in mind that if we don't act tonight, that we're essentially going to be creating a waiting list. And, okay, for all the reasons that we've discussed, why we don't want to create a waiting list, we want to keep our kiddos in Hastings, all that. What do we have for a plan in case of emergency at the high school? Because the high school is under Alice for the high school. Alice at the middle school looks a little different,
Yes.
okay? Alice in other places looks a little different. So we're dealing with really little guys here. What does that, and we may not have a complete answer for that tonight. Chip just went down. I just got shorter. We may not have an answer for that tonight, but I guess I just want to recognize that we have to have a plan
Right.
for that. And so that's one. Two is that as a board, we need to recognize that up until a few months ago, we didn't have this as a plan. So we were not using the residual funds, okay? What we believe we have left over for our bond. So by moving forward with this, we need to recognize as a board that we may be taking something
It's not
else
that we may
off
be,
the
we
list.
are taking
I
something
mean,
else
because
off.
this is a roughly $400,000 expenditure.
Well, we can talk about that in the discussion, but I think, $250,000 of it is the secured entrance, which whether or not we move the preschool was number one on the priority list. And so I think it's important to recognize
Is that the
that
entire?
portion of
Is
it.
that the entire secured entrance was 250,000? Because we're talking about the
Yes.
full entrance, and then don't we have another entrance that we're
Yes,
putting
but the
card reader on?
250,000 is specifically just for that main entrance.
Right.
Yes, in the lower
Okay,
entrance,
lower
yes.
entrance.
Is it fair to say that, based on the document I saw earlier, that there is an additional 100,000 because of this in particular?
Roughly.
Yes, roughly about $100,000. However, as we talked in the facilities committee and with Mike Johnson, that these additions are things that the high school would see as a benefit even after or when the preschool was to move out, that these are adding positive value to the high school, and they're not something that would be a regret that we put in, right? That they would still be able to use these in a beneficial way at the high school.
Even things like the hand washing area. I mean, if all of a sudden 2 years from now or 1 year from now we say, oh, hey, we have a different plan, whatever. I mean, there's probably going to be some reconfigure.
Yeah,
Well, the primary restroom, the hand washing area that's external, would be the only hand washing area for people using that facility. Then there'd be another hand washing station in the pod, and that may or may not be of great use in the future.
Right.
But you would say the hand washing station for the restrooms would be,
Yes, that's
Necessary.
all of our restrooms to go to.
Right.
Mike, can you speak to the Alice question?
Sure. One of the things we learned about Alice is that you want to make it age appropriate and you want to give control to people as long as they're developmentally able to handle that. So what's been a benefit at the high school is that our students feel like they're empowered to make decisions. Our little ones will not be empowered to make that decision. So we know that if there is an event that happens at the high school, there may be some staff members and students that are going. We also know that the little ones will be looking to the adults to know what to do. So their decision will then guide the students on whether that's an internal lockdown, whether that's an evacuation. What I like about the location is that there's 2 ways to get out quickly on that main level, 98% of the time. Unfortunately, if there's a shooter, there's 1 person. If you hear sounds and go the other way, you're going to get to safety. But we would, kind of ancillary to this is we would not have the regular announcements in the 1C. We would reprogram that except for emergency situation, because they don't need to hear all of the announcements, about the wonderful things that are happening. But they do need to hear if there's an Alice alert. And then we also have additional radios, so we stay in communication with radios, so they would also have those radios with us. But then we would just have to practice and train on that.
Yep.
And include our parents, so our parents would know in the 1C area just what would be expected if something were to happen.
What's
And-
the Alice policy at Tilden?
Well,
With
so
the
right-
adults and
right.
the small.
So right now, Tilden does lockdown if there were an issue. Importantly, all of the staff at Tilden are trained in Alice, and so if there were an issue like that, they have already been trained in the different options that could be taken if for some reason they weren't in the CPOD. If they were in the gymnasium or in the music room or something like that, watching students, that all of the staff have been trained, and so they would then at that point use their own knowledge and their own decision on what would be best for their students. I would say also Tilden's registration opened 2 days ago, and so their classes cap at 20. And in the first 2 days, as of this morning, they already had 13 kiddos registered, and that is the fastest and most they have ever had at this point. Usually the biggest jump is around August. Their morning classes are already completely full in 2 days, and again, as of this morning, they had 1 classroom more than halfway full. So we are seeing that this is something that parents are wanting, and they're jumping on it. Not necessarily the high school, I mean Tilden.
And the parent, how are they communicating to the parents I know when the folks were here, we said, I believe I heard them say they were going to be communicating that this is the plan, or this is what we're talking about. It's not yet approved, but this is probably the way we're going to be going. Is that what they've been
Correct.
saying?
That's not
Yes.
exactly what
Yeah,
happened.
and
Well,
I heard there was
No?
There was,
What-
it was a little rough. Someone
Well,
got,
that's
well-
not what they said, or that's not what happened? from
someone
the-
got excited and had made a post on
what did
Facebook
they
last week. Well, that's what I'm trying to explain.
Oh, okay.
Someone got excited at Tilden and made a post on Facebook last week saying it was official. The post was removed because we have not taken a vote on this.
Okay,
Um,
I was
right.
harkening back to the meeting. and
Right.
I'm like,
No,
okay,
and so
what
at this
is-
point, they have been saying that those are discussions, and if we move to approve it tonight, they will call all of the families who have already registered and make sure that they are aware of the change in location.
Okay, and thank you for your explanation on Alice, that there's been some thought put into it, so thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
I would like to jump off Scott's point, and I think it's perfectly valid. If we spend $100,000 on this, it's $100,000 we're not spending on something else that was already on our list. We had a next
This
list.
was not on the list, correct?
Preschool at the high school is not on the list, so it's $100,000 that was not identified in the body.
Yes.
And there was a perfectly long list. So I would like to see us be moving towards getting some of those regular facilities committee meetings going and looking at bonds and considering priorities, because I'm not sure that we have the same priority situation. I think we need to have ongoing conversations and final decisions about number of secured entrances at the high school, understand what that's gonna cost us, understand the broad district piece around storage needs, equipment needs, storage for the equipment needs, And we talk about it every time we get together at the board table, but I think we gotta start digging in. The end of the known bond pieces is, it's in the
Fast
short
approaching.
term. Yeah, it's in the short term.
Yep.
It is time to start having the next
Mhm.
conversation.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, to that end, I really do value this. I think what we're talking about here would be at the top of the list. And
Right.
it just is happening. I mean, we can't control the timing.
Right.
but-
So the security entrance was already number one on the list beforehand. Bathroom renovations were already top on the list beforehand. So there's about 100,000 of the piece that was not on the high priority list before this came up. I mean, we're talking about they'll fill that preschool classroom very quickly. So we'll start turning students away soon.
Yep, but to Lisa's point, I think it would be
Mhm.
helpful for future discussions, whether it's something like this or
Yeah.
something other, that then we can pull out our master
Right.
list and say, well, based on our best estimates, here's items A through,
Yeah.
G that we wanted to do, and now G is gonna fall off.
Yep,
If
I
we do
agree.
this, G is gonna fall off.
Yep, we need to start making our priority list and getting that all set up and seeing where
Yeah,
we're
I
at.
think we have to polish our priority
Mhm.
list, and I think we need to be able to say exactly what Scott said, which is, should something new be identified, we need to be able to say we're weighing this piece versus this piece, and
Yep.
have that actual value conversation.
Mhm.
Not just, it's just an extra 100, it's just an extra 100 until we've talked ourselves out of all the decisions.
Mike, can you speak to the faculty relocation in CPOC?
Sure.
I know I keep dragging you up here. I'm
No, I'll
sorry.
just kneel. So I've met with people in the CPOD over the last number of years, because when we've looked at middle school coming here, we had, fifth grade that came here, we actually talked about, hey, we have room at the high school, might it make sense to do something at the high school? So when we've had declining enrollment and we've had staff that have had access to other rooms, because we've had Camp Horizons in the summer and there's been some lack of access, the staff had said, hey, we're great, we know we're going to be there. So they've known over the years that there might be something here. I don't know if they necessarily thought it would be preschool. But we do have, I have a couple of rooms that are empty, one that we're using for some small group tutoring that we can use in other areas. We have 2 rooms that are used for furniture and books, and we have a plan to relocate the furniture and the books, which is, we'd rather be serving kids than storing books. And we also have some teachers that are in large classrooms that can really be in a smaller classroom, so we're going to collapse a couple of those. So then I work with the staff that are currently in 1C. It's one of the few things really that I do by seniority, is that who are the most senior teachers that are there, where are some of the open rooms that we would have in the school. We would also take the opportunity then to talk with the entire staff and say, we have not reorganized our building in about 11 years. Do we want to take this opportunity and move other people around so they can have those curricular relationships next to someone that might make more sense? So we're just going to try and turn it into a positive. We currently have a couple of staff members that share rooms. We probably will have a couple or 3 that will share rooms. And that's something when you're a younger staff member, as I was, that's just one of the things that you do.
So just to tie back into the recommendation a little bit, it's clear that the board has not intended to find a new place for all-day preschool, has not intended to shuffle staff around. I've listened to multiple high school staff members who've talked about the use of the space and shared their concerns on that, just how that may impact them. But in the end, the reason I'm making this recommendation is the number one return on any investment you can have, whether you take it out of bond funds or you take it out of your general fund. You don't want to take something off the list, find money in the general fund to pay for it. But in making sure you don't lose preschool students is going to come back so many times over, because you talk about 100,000, wherever you take it from. Whether you pass the hat, take it out of the general fund, or take it out of the bond fund. 100,000 spent making sure you don't lose even a handful of preschool students. In today's dollars, K through 12 over the course of their time, in today's dollars, that's $10,000 per student. And Jen and I went over, okay, every district, based on the various funding that comes in and the weighting on the kids, they all kind of come up with their own estimate, rough estimate of each and every kid is worth X. And the last district I was on, we were using $10,000, and Jen said, that's a pretty good rule of thumb for Hastings as well. So in 1 year, 5 kids, lost at preschool level is gonna cost hundreds of $1,000s over the lifetime. So yes, it's $100,000 wherever you get it from, but that should be one of the easier decisions, one of the easier recommendations, let's say, that I can make, why that's a wise move, even though it wasn't what you had planned. And locating them at a different site is not an intentional plan, a long-term plan. It was a, what can you do today to make sure you don't lose those kids and have that impact over the next 15 years?
Right, and I think by approving this, we're not saying this is a forever plan.
No,
We're
it's
saying,
just-
No,
we're
it-
saying,
We have a nasty
Tactical.
tendency for temporary to become permanent.
It even
We do, everybody
says,
does, but I
I
think
mean,
we
Camp
need to be
Horizon is supposed to be
intentional.
temporary and it's been for high school
We need
for
to
over a decade.
intentionally establish a team and a timeline.
yeah.
Yeah.
Much like we need to do around student support services, much like we need to do around funding. Oh, I know, I'm saying we should recognize that this is our weakness, and we need to do that. We as,
right,
at a leadership council level.
Yep.
And then we, the board, needs to hold them accountable to that timeline.
yep, we need to have a
We don't
larger
have a history of doing
discussion.
it, but we can fix it.
We need to have a larger discussion about the space needs in this district, not only with Tilden, but also with special education where we're running out of
Yes,
room.
they're running
And this
out
is a,
too.
this is a discussion for what we need in the long term, and this isn't just for Tilden. I mean, special ed is bursting at the seams, and we need more space for our special ed programming, and so this is a top priority to be figuring out right now is our space issue.
Well, and to jump off of Brian's point, we do have a history of you solve a problem and then it just becomes the way it is. Maybe I would propose one of the things we start seeing in our administrative reports, and maybe this happens after we have a permanent superintendent and we do a mutual expectations retreat, is we say, here are the 4 big things our district needs to be solving over multiple years. We need to be solving space, we need to be solving student supports, we need to be solving, and then we get regular we get an update at every board meeting about one of those things. So that we say, yeah, where are we at on this conversation around facilities, where are we at? And it's not us coming from a committee and bringing that, it's our leadership council team coming to us and saying, yeah, we're intentionally looking at where we're using space and what's the best use. And Haven says, yes, we can bring in this program for special services and we can do this other thing.
and I saw in
And
the
we
note-
don't go to this
sorry.
crisis solution, we've had a
Mhm.
couple too many of those in the
Yeah.
last 2 months.
I saw in the facilities meeting notes too, that there was a item in there about, hey, let's talk about this
Mhm.
again in the next 3 to 6 months, so this is,
Yeah, we just
yep,
can't
this
let
is our decision today, but
Another.
there, we all know that that other potential solutions have a much longer runway
Mhm.
than what we've got here.
Right, and I know for myself, I'll do that stuff if I put it on a regular public,
Mhm.
placeholder.
Yep, but I
guess
mean, with the STARS
Yeah.
program losing their lease, I mean, we're already, right now, in the middle of finding more space.
I guess I would like to see us move to coordinate a facilities committee meeting as soon as possible with members and get that set for us so we can start in on some of the discussion and look at things that we may or may not be able to address as we move forward, as we close down to the end of the bond and where we're at.
I absolutely agree.
Mm-hmm,
With
I
that-
agree.
With that thought in mind, I'd like to call the motion.
And we already have a motion and a second on the table.
Yes, Dave just called it. Call for the vote.
Okay. Is there any more discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Okay, I lost my little agenda thing again. Disappears. It's like magic. All right, Becky, I am trying to pull up the agenda, but my board book has vanished.
The next items are
Okay.
the affirmations
Okay.
of the policies.
Got it, it came up. I found the return to meeting, we got it. It just likes to disappear every once in a while. Okay, so next up is affirming a number of policies from the 200 series. And so these are policies that we already have, and we have gone through and just read over them, seen if we need any changes in them, and determined that we don't. And so this is really just putting a new date on policies that we already have. Absolutely nothing has been changed, which is why we're using the terminology. Thank you, Scott, for recommending that, affirming rather than adopting a policy. So I don't know, can we approve these as a bulk approval?
No change.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve policy 201 and the subsequent policies on the agenda with no changes to the substance of the current policy versions?
So, second.
Okay, any discussion?
If we're doing the whole bulk of them, on policy number 213,
Mhm.
the committees that are listed don't align with our current committees.
And policy,
So that probably just needs to be cleaned up prior to approving it. On 203.5 school board meeting agenda, and I realize that this is no substantive change, in fact, no change from our current policy, but I wonder if we wouldn't want
But it doesn't match.
a timeline
well, that's true, the
for,
committees don't
oh,
have what our
it doesn't
standing
match.
committees have.
So on page 1, the tentative agenda and supporting documents shall be sent to the school board members blank, 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 days prior. So I feel like that blank should be filled in prior to approval. So that's 203.5. So I would not be prepared to approve 205.3 or
203.5
203.5, thank
Or
you.
two-
I
or-
could hear that it did, or
Right.
213.
or 213. Yeah, I'm looking at 213 now. Good catch. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for finding those.
That's a good catch, Lisa.
So just amend the motions that they come off.
Okay,
I mean, they'll stay as action items for a
Okay.
future meeting,
Yeah, just put them in the next
and they
list.
need more work.
Just
You
clean
wanna
it up.
Okay.
amend- you wanna
So-
amend-
Who made the motion?
You?
No.
Brian made the
Brian.
motion.
Brian
Brian
made
made
the
the
motion.
motion.
Amend.
Yeah, I'd like to amend the motion, so should we just remove them for now?
Amend the motion to remove
Yep.
those two?
Yeah, amend the motion to remove 203 and 213 pending.
yep, 203.5.
203.5, forgive me, and 213 pending revision of those two.
Second.
Okay, any more discussion? All right.
Was 213 on the original list?
It's not on
Yeah.
this list, but it's on
Oh,
board
it's
book.
in
No,
it.
no,
Okay,
no,
got
but
it.
it's on
there.
the
Got it.
It's
Okay.
hiding somewhere.
It's there.
It's here,
Um,
looking right at it.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, motion carries. And so those two will be worked on some more and brought back at a future date. So the last thing is our future meeting dates. I'll pull it up just so everyone can see it. So we do have, well, we do need to reschedule the policy meeting.
Do you, or just, can you hold it before 6 o'clock?
Yeah.
6 to 8 is what's,
6 to 8
you
is the
cannot have
blackout.
any board action 6 to 8, and you're starting at 4:30, so it's
Well,
up to you.
so-
But I want to make sure you knew that.
Thank you.
They're
give
blocked
us
out,
enough
plus
time?
if people want to participate.
But it's 6 to 8, right?
Yeah. So from 4:30 to 6, we can still meet.
Well,
I don't think so.
Becky says that maybe it's no meetings before 8 o'clock.
No meetings at all before 8.
I-
Okay, well, the policy committee.
I understood it to be from 6 to 8.
We can meet after this and change our date, and then that can get changed online.
Yeah, we'll change it.
And we'll figure out what works with our schedules. Otherwise, work session on March 11th,
That's what you suggested.
special meeting on the 24th, and the regular board meeting is on the 25th. So,
Yeah, and so then do we need, we have a MSBA meeting with MSBA on March 2nd?
yep, that
Right,
one's
That should
not.
probably be on the list. We have meet and confer on the 11th. We have self-funded health insurance on the 3rd. I don't know if those should be on the list. And then how many people are going to Gabe's cultural training? And if so, do we need to report anything? Board members?
What date is
I
that?
think I'm a yes now. I have to resolve one last driving problem,
What
but
date is that?
4th,
Oh, yeah, that's right, I remember, it's like,
2:45 to 4.
Yeah, I cannot.
my calendar's not working on there, so I'll use this calendar.
Yeah, I can be there for the first half.
If we have more than 4, do we need to post that?
Yeah, that was my question at
That's
hand.
what you're driving
Right.
towards.
No.
Yeah.
Only-
Who's
I will
LES?
not.
Only if you're meeting. If you don't cover board business, you are at an event, you don't have to post it.
Even if it's a school event?
Yep.
Okay.
Lisa, is that our 245?
2:45 to 4
Does
is what I have
324
written
say
down.
6:30?
Say that again?
The 324, does that say 6:30?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We talked about pushing that a little bit later.
Even later than that?
No, but that having it be later than
Yeah,
that.
instead of our 6 o'clock
Oh,
usual.
okay.
Maybe let me be a little late.
Probably in my calendar.
I really
and
wanna go
just-
to that.
Okay. So that is all.
May I just add one item?
Yeah.
Just a topic. I'd just like to thank Becky for all of your work with Board
Yes.
Book over the last 2
Yes.
weeks.
It's amazing.
Because I know this has been a massive thorn in your side, and you're probably feeling like you're drinking from the fire hose, learning all of this, plus doing your regular job, plus dealing with everything else that comes up. And I just wanted to say thank you, because you're always super responsive to things, especially when I
Yeah.
email you with dumb questions. So, no, thank you.
Well,
You're
you were very gracious with the stupid questions
No,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're doing a
Very
great job.
gracious,
So
yes.
it doesn't hurt to say thank you.
Can I publicly thank Mrs. Pemble for the treats?
Already
I've
did.
only eaten like 4. Well, this is actually the 4th one.
Dig in.
You might want to cut them off. I'm just saying.
It's getting bad over here.
We're gonna see
Really.
Brian at the Y first thing in the morning.
I will be. I will be the first thing working out.
I know.
Yep.
Okay, so do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, second.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Good night.
Good night.
Oh, picture. We need a picture.
Motion to adjourn.
Oh.
As no discussion.
I kind of like
I wasn't gonna do it.
Someone